The Omega's secret legacy. The handler yanked Seris Valewyn to the edge of the auction plank and tilted her face to the torchlight. Smoke crawled along the rafters. Boots scraped. The room's heat pressed hard and close. Omega meat. Won't last a week. Hold her higher. She fixed her eyes on a patch of tar in the far wall and breathed in a steady line. Breath could be a wall. Behind the animal stink of wet leather and ale, a thinner scent curled through the air, cold as water under ice. It had followed her since childhood, rising whenever fear tried to swallow her. She had never decided whether it came from the world or from her own skin. The crier's staff struck wood. Omega, young, trained for kitchens and stable. Quiet hands. Docile. Docile rubbed like sandpaper, but she let it slide. Rope burned her wrists where the handler had tied too tight. She set her shoulders. The bids started without heat, tossed from the benches to pass the time. Laughter rose and fell. Someone whistled 3 notes that meant nothing and made her feel small anyway. The back door opened on a draft of night. Noise thinned to a hush that wasn't respect so much as reaction, the way a field of birds stills when a hawk passes. Ronan Duskbane entered with the wind at his shoulders. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Men shifted to make him a path because their bodies knew better than their pride. Black coat, simple and hard lines, collar open enough to show the thick column of his throat and the pale cut of an old scar along his jaw. His guards were darker shapes with watchful eyes. He reached the rail. Torchlight turned brittle near him. Something in him lifted its head the way a beast tests water with its tongue. The scent that had drawn him wasn't tallow or sweat. It was clean and wrong for a room like this, thin as a blade of winter sun. His ribs felt too narrow. Alpha Duskbane, the crier tried. Shadow Fang honors this hall. We have no lots fit for your time. Ronan didn't answer. He was looking at Saras. Close, she resolved into fine lines that didn't match the word Omega. High cheekbones under grime. A mouth that looked like it remembered softness, but hadn't used it in a while. Black hair that caught silver when the torchlight moved as if frost had brushed it at dawn. The rope had left marks. She stood straight anyway. Claim her. His wolf pushed against bone with a bright impatience. No. A bearded wolf shouldered forward, voice oily with a joke he hoped would turn into advantage. Double whatever the last man said. Alpha Vera Thornfang likes a laugh before bed. Thornfang rolled through the room like a dropped knife. The handler froze with a knife of his own halfway to the rope. What is the price? Ronan said. The handler swallowed out a number. The bearded wolf opened his mouth to raise it again. Ronan lifted 2 fingers. A guard put a leather pouch in the crier's hand. The clink of it had a kind of finality. Sold, the crier blurted, quick as a man who wants to keep all his fingers. The bearded wolf's grin flickered, then settled into something thinner. He would run to carry word to Vera. That was what men like him did. Ronan stepped onto the plank without asking it to hold him. Boards did not dare complain. Saras did not flinch with him close. They shared air. He watched silver wake in her hair. The rope burns on her wrists, the set of her spine. The scent coiled into him like wire and hummed. Look at me. Her gaze lifted. His eyes were wintered amber, reading her like a map with part of the legend missing. Heat moved through his chest and tightened into purpose. Mine. The certainty throbbed, not thought so much as percussion. He shrugged off his cloak and laid it around her shoulders. Warmth bled into the cold marks on her skin. The room murmured and tried to sound brave. Covering an Omega. He doesn't share. He set his hand near her elbow, not touching, steady like a post set in floodwater. Walk. She walked. The cloak's hem caught on a nail. She lifted it free without breaking stride. People in the first row leaned back, a pattern older than their names. At the door, an old man with ash-bright eyes peered up and grinned as if he recognized weather. Stormvale winds, he rasped. Feel them, do you? Elder's breath in the eaves. A woman swatted him. He cackled anyway, and vanished sideways into the press. Ronan's shoulders tightened by a fraction. Elder Marwin Stormvale scratched a locked cupboard in his memory where superstitions went to die. He had met the seer once on a road streaked with ditch blood and early snow. The man had smelled like char and prophecy, and had said nothing. Silence had been worse than omen. They stepped into the night. Cold cleaned the air. Horses stamped at the rail. Ronan's men moved like a formation that had been drilled until it was bone. Reins loose, buckles checked, lamps trimmed. A covered wagon waited, canvas pulled tight over ribs, iron lamps steady. The shadow Fang crest burned into its door was a crescent claw around a sliver of moon. Derek, square and even, rested a hand on the latch. Sable, lean with eyes like wet bark, paced a slow line that turned shadows over to see what hid under them. Inside, Ronan said. Saras climbed into the wagon. Inside held a folded blanket, a bucket tied to a post, a long bench sanded smooth. No chain, no straw. She sat. The cloak smelled like cedar and iron and cliff air. The door clicked shut. Wheels rolled, the hall fell away, leaving torches to burn out without her. She watched a sliver of road through a knothole. Derek's left shoulder rose and fell as he breathed. Sable's horse trotted ahead, ears pricked. Trees bled into one another, then separated again. The sky was a low lid with a thumbprint of moon somewhere behind it. The latch clicked. The door opened a hand's width. Ronan's face filled the gap, lamp glow lying thin along the scar on his jaw. He held out a water skin. Drink. She took a few pulls and handed it back. Thank you. He watched her like a man learning the balance point of a blade on his finger. Do you know where we go? Shadow Fang. The wheels spoke for a while. What will you do with me? Work, eat, sleep. We will decide where you belong when we understand what you are. She let the cloak slip enough to cool the rope burns against the tiny draft from the door. I am an Omega. No. The word dropped through her like a stone into a well. She had expected a lecture, a list, a place. She got refusal. It felt like someone had rubbed a smudge from glass and found a different face beneath. What do you think I am? He didn't answer. He took her in like pressure, then tapped the frame. The door settled. The wagon creak settled too. She leaned her head back to the canvas rib and counted breaths until the pulse in her wrist matched the wheels. 50. Then 100. A line of light slid across her knee like a blade. Heat rose under her sternum and fell as if bellows far away were working in time with the road. Hold, murmured a not-quite voice, the shape of a word forming cold on glass. She softened to listen. Years of being last had not stopped something inside her from turning toward thin sun. As a child, she had woken with frost taste in her mouth and a howl lodged behind her tongue, and had swallowed it whole. Omegas didn't lead. Omegas learned the angles of rooms and the footsteps of men and how to be useful before they were seen. Hold closer, not a command to freeze. A hand closing over hers to keep it from dropping something it didn't believe it was allowed to carry. Outside, Derek shifted. East Bank had 2 on foot earlier. Old prints. Leave them. Ronan sat with forearms on knees and watched the road cut a narrow seam through the dark. The scent from the wagon seeped through canvas, climbed into him on every breath, made a circle of his blood and came back unchanged. His wolf paced and bumped and pressed for purchase. Claimer, enough. The beast shoved once more, then settled to a low growl that vibrated along his spine. Sable moved ahead, eyes on the ditch, hands light and ready. The road pinched where 2 spruces leaned toward each other like tired fathers. The wagon slid between them. Horse breath hung white. An owl crossed on silent wings. Ronan didn't look for omen and feathers. But memory brought Elder Marwin to the cold place under his sternum again, hand held under a cup. He breathed deeper. The scent answered, thin, bright, old. Saras set her palm to the plank and let the wheel's vibration move into bone. Listening had kept her alive. Now it reported something she could not neatly use. Heat again. Current again. A prickle behind her ribs like a storm forming under skin. "Why did you cover me?" The latch eased. The door opened the width of another finger. He balanced on the step without leaning in. "You're under my banner." Clean answer. Not soft, not cruel. It left room for reasons he did not hand her. She folded cloak edge under her palms and let wool warm the burns. "Thornfang runner will carry word," Derek said low. "If the bearded fool meant it. Let Vera hear." Ronan's tone landed like a stake. If Vera wanted amusement, he could take it from his own lands. If he wanted anything from Shadowfang, he could put his hand in and see what came back. The wolf inside Ronan liked the idea of that hand returning lighter. "Do you fear Shadowfang?" he asked, eyes on the road. No. It surprised her. Fear had been the weather over her years, but the land ahead smelled like a clean knife and a fast river. The man outside smelled like iron and a winter that did not bow. "Do you fear me?" She remembered the cloak dropping over her shoulders, the word no thrown at the lie of her label. The feeling he made didn't fit only into fear. "I don't know." "Good." The road lifted into the low swell that marked Shadowfang's border. The air changed, strained as if pulled through bone. Rock showed like sleeping backs under frost. Trees stood a little further apart, carving clean lanes for wind. Ronan knocked twice and opened the door. Moonlight made her eyes the color of rain over stone. "Can you stand?" She rose. The cloak slipped. She caught it. He put his hand where she could use it without being taken. Her fingers closed around his for a heartbeat, cold and hot at once, winter and iron. "Walk." She stepped down. The wagon creaked forward. Horses leaned. Sable touched the iron rim, an old habit meant to bless the axle. Derek set his shoulders, clicked soft, and the team crested the rise. They stood a moment on the line where one set of rules ended and another began. Wind shifted out of Shadowfang, smelling of river glass and rock kept clean by cold. Voices from the hall were only ideas now, but ideas travel far when thrown hard. "Run to Vera. Tell him Duskbane bought a toy. Tell him it smelled like rain." Ronan listened without a smile. Storm fights pleased him more than sun victories, but another part of him had put a cloak on a girl in a room full of teeth and hadn't looked to see who watched. His wolf spoke with rare patience. "Do not give Vera this." "We won't." Saras looked across the land that would own her days next. Rumor named Shadowfang teeth and chill and law. The air brushed her skin like a welcome that wasn't kindness. She pulled the cloak tight and let cold fill places that hadn't felt clean in years. "Why did you buy me?" she asked, because silence had weight. "You smelled wrong." "Wrong. Not like anything I know. Like the first storm over a new ridge. Like a river when the ice breaks." He left the words where they fell. She held them. "Is that bad?" "It isn't what we're used to." Under his ribs, the beast lifted its muzzle and breathed a wordless agreement that felt like fate wearing a hunter's face. He turned to the wagon, to men, to land that fit his stride. Inside. She climbed into the not quite dark. He closed the door and laid his palm flat to canvas a moment, measuring the heat. It met him, not just body warmth but banked light, the sense of something that would make its own if given room. Wind slid down off the rise with a speed that promised change before dawn. Derek clicked the team to a stronger pull. Sable dropped to the rear, gaze angling back along the road they had cut. Lamp beams painted long lines ahead and burned back only enough dark to see the next 10 strides. The wagon's rhythm found its place under Saras's ribs. The not-quite voice turned toward her with all its attention, and she breathed, because breath could be a wall and a bridge both. And both would do until she learned the name of what she held and why the night had whispered for her to keep it. In front, Ronan walked like a dark stroke against the land and glanced back once, not to check whether she had obeyed but to mark the gravity drawing them, and he let the pull stand. He would find out what it was. He always did. Dawn had not broken, but the world had begun to pale as the wagon climbed the last rise toward Shadowfang lands. Frost netted the grasses along the ditch. The river ahead showed as a strip of dull glass, its skin thin enough to shiver when the horse's breath rolled over it. Saras sat with her hands under the cloak and felt the rhythm of the wheels settle behind her ribs until her body kept time, without asking. The scent in the air changed the way a room's light changes when a door opens. Stone, cold and clean. Pine sap cut sharp, not sweet. She leaned toward the knothole and watched the road unspool into a valley where a black keep rose from bare rock. It did not look like a palace made to show wealth. It looked like a jaw set against weather and men. Torches burned along the inner walls, steady, trimmed by hands that despised waste. Ronan walked ahead of the wagon, shoulders carrying the shape of his law as if it were something he wore under his coat. Derek kept the team's pace exact. Sable swung back once, scanning the horizon, then moved forward again with no wasted motion. Inside Ronan, the wolf paced. It did not prowl for sport. It circled as if measuring a room before deciding where to sleep, where to watch, where to wait to spring. His lungs tightened each time the scent from the wagon threaded into him. The beast pushed. Claim her. Not here. He did not speak aloud. He did not need to. The wolf pressed again, quieter this time, the insistence beneath the word, more important than the word itself. Do not pretend you do not know what this is. I know what it can cost. He did not look back. He did not need to know where she was. His attention carried a weight that pulled the space between them taut like rope. When the road bent toward the keep, the wind slid off the walls and brought the smell of Bankshead fires and hammered iron, of leather, oil, horses, frost. Beneath those, a line of something thinner ran straight to him. Hold, the not-quite voice told Saras again, and for the first time it felt like a promise added to the instruction. She let her lungs fill slowly until her breath matched the pace of the team and the step of the man outside. When the wagon crested the final rise, the keep's outer gate showed its bars and the men on the catwalk above it. Open, a voice called down, and the chain clanked through a wheel. The gate lifted, teeth flashing, and settled into its brackets with a sound that felt older than anyone who stood to hear it. Inside the walls, the yard woke with the quiet intensity of men who rose before light, because they liked to meet it already moving. Warriors in training leathers turned to look. Boys with brooms stopped and leaned on their handles. A woman with a bandaged hand stepped out of the way of the wagon and measured Saras with a gaze that did not apologize for curious. Alpha, Derek called soft because that was the habit of men who kept order. Ronan lifted a hand without looking. When the wagon stopped, he opened the door and tilted his head. Out. Saras stepped down, boots meeting stone that had been worn smooth where feet landed, pocked where frozen water bit and thawed, repaired without fuss. The yard smelled of hay and steel and men who worked. She felt the look of the place, the way a body learns the balance of a room. Lines true, corners clean. No performance, only function. She pulled the cloak closer against the cold and straightened until her spine reached for the crown of her head. A murmur ran through the gathered wolves. Not a welcome. Not yet. Questions thrown in the same tone as the ones tossed at the auction, but different underneath. These wolves knew weight. They wanted to know what she weighed in the hand. A tall warrior with a shaved head and scars like pale vines across his forearms took 2 steps closer than manners. His mouth tipped toward a smirk. His gaze slid to the rope burns at Saras's wrists and then lower, appraising for weakness as if he were looking at a horse's legs. Found a kitten. A ripple of low laughter from the men around him, the kind that wants to be braver than it is under a watcher's eyes. Ronan did not raise his voice. Step back. The warrior blinked at the flatness of the order. He shifted one boot half an inch and waited as if to see how much he could afford to test. Now. The second order dragged the cold up out of the stone and into the air. The smirk broke without a sound. The warrior took 2 full steps back and kept his eyes on the ground until the weight in the yard shifted off his shoulders. Ronan swept the yard with a glance that told every spine what it already knew, but needed to hear out loud. She is under my banner. She is not for your hands or your mouths. Anyone who forgets will find his teeth on the stones. The woman with the bandaged hand looked away first, not in refusal but in acceptance, and began moving again, practical as dawn. A boy with a broom gulped in a breath and started sweeping where he had stopped. The tall warrior's jaw worked. Understood. Good. Ronan turned to Saras. You do not wander. You do not cross the inner gate without an escort. You do not walk the outer wall alone. Anything you need for work or food or sleep is given by the steward. Ask Derek or Sable until you know the faces. Seris looked past him at the carved stone over the inner arch. A crescent, a narrow moon, a cluster of short lines that were not letters she knew, but felt like someone's voice if a voice were carved into rock. Under the marks, a bronze plate had been bolted long ago. The edges were worn where hands had touched it when they passed. A law made into metal doesn't need to be shouted. I do not run, she said. You know that already. I know what I see. Anything else I learn from what you do. The wolves nearest them shifted, frustrated by not understanding what they were witnessing. The scent in the yard carried their questions like a sour note under clean music. A short-bodied man with bright eyes, quartermaster by the look of him, arrived at a trot and sketched a nod that was not an attempt at courtly behavior, so much as a practical acknowledgement of the way gravity worked here. Alpha. Word is already sliding along the road south, he said. If the talk in the hall was true, Fang will hear by noon. Let Vera hear, Ronan said, again without flair. The quartermaster's gaze flicked to Saras, then back to his Alpha's face. He was too old to be rude without reason and too useful to pretend not to notice odd facts. I'll put 2 extra pairs on the south switchbacks tonight. We'll keep the inner ridge clean. Ronan gave his chin the smallest drop. Do it. Derek had dismounted without the sound of a boot hitting ground. He gestured toward a doorway under the arch. Steward can see to a room. Warm water if the fires sit right. See to it, Ronan said. Derek made a shape with his mouth that wasn't quite a smile. He had seen this mood on his Alpha before, colder than anger, quieter than satisfaction. It meant a problem was being caged in his head and measured for weak bars. He put a hand toward a corridor. Saras stepped to follow. Wait. Ronan's voice caught the edge of her name without saying it. She turned. You will tell no one what we spoke on the road, he said. No one. Not a line of it. I did not hear a line of it I could repeat. Good. She thought for a breath that he would add something to explain the contradiction of covering her in a room full of teeth and then calling her property. He did not. He turned away and crossed the yard toward the training ring, with a stride that sent men out of his path without words. Sable fell in beside Saras and Derek as they entered the arch. The corridor smelled like stone and wax, and the thin sweetness of lye from scrubbed floors. Voices dropped in volume in her wake and rose again after she passed. It was not personal, she understood with a kind of calm that surprised her. It was order checking itself and adjusting to a new peace. Derek opened a door into a narrow room with a cot, a plank table, a chair, a hook for a cloak. The cot had a thick blanket folded square as a book. The window slit faced north, over the river's bend and a line of dark trees. Hot water, Derek said. Food fast. Healer for those. He flicked his eyes at the rope burns. I have had worse. Fang prefers not to copy the worst of other packs. He left before she could shape a reply into something that didn't sound like either gratitude or challenge. Sable set a small brazier on the floor and made a neat nest of kindling under the coals. He struck the flint twice and coaxed a steady flame without fuss. The heat spread into the room in slow fingers that took the edge off the cold. Sable's eyes slid to the cloak around her shoulders. Keep that on until the room holds its own? She nodded. He gave the brazier one last glance, the kind a man gives a tool he trusts because he maintains it well, and stepped back into the corridor. The door stayed open on its latch. Shadowfang did not waste doors closing unless weather or danger required it. Saras sat on the cot and set her hands on her knees again. The cloak's weight was still warm. The rope burns smarted more than they had in the wagon, because warmth makes pain remember itself. She touched them lightly, marking the line of the fibers that had bitten her. The skin would heal clean if she didn't worry it. The room held the kind of quiet that isn't emptiness but space made ready. Under it, she felt the keep's heart, the slow thud of men moving with purpose, water in pipes, a hammer lifted, dropped, lifted. She rested her eyes on the window slit and let her breath spread and thin. Hold. The voice shaped itself again, clearer with the solidness of a thing you could set on a table and see that it did not roll away. I am, she whispered. The brazier hissed as a sap pocket in the kindling popped. Footsteps climbed the corridor. A woman with a gray braid and a basket on her arm slid into the room and set down a bowl and a cup. Broth steamed. A slice of dark bread gleamed with a slick of fat. The woman set a shallow basin on the floor and poured in water from a kettle that had been wrapped in cloth to keep the heat. It smoked in the cold air. Hands, the woman said, not unkindly. Saras held them out. The woman cleaned the rope burns with water that had been steeped with something bitter and green, then patted them dry with a soft cloth. Name. Seris Valewyn. You're under Shadowfang law now, the woman said, as if she were reminding her of weather, not lecturing. It will be told to you proper later. The short of it is simple. We don't waste. We don't lie when asked straight. We don't leave our weak untended. If you don't fit those, you don't fit here. I fit. Eat, the woman said, but her gaze softened at the edges as if she saw the difference between someone saying the words to survive and someone meaning them because they needed to. Saras ate. The broth was salted by a hand that had learned where to stop. The bread bit back. The cup held water clean enough to taste like the river smelled. When the woman left, the air felt warmer by a shade, as if the room had accepted Saras's weight and begun sharing its own. Across the yard, in the lower hall, 3 of Ronan's captains were already waiting because they knew the turn of their alpha's stride and had learned to be in the rooms where decisions attached themselves to the day. They didn't speak when he entered. He took the end of the table, palms flat on the scarred wood. Southwatch doubled, he said. It will be. The oldest captain answered. Not a promise, a fact reported from the near future. Our ravens? 2 to the river forks, 1 to the east ridge. If Thornfang asks questions, I want to hear the echo before the sound. A younger captain, quick-eyed, flicked a glance toward the arch where voices still passed in the corridor. Word from the hall said Vera has a messenger already in the saddle. Let him ride. Ronan leaned a fraction closer to the table, and the wolf in him leaned with him. He will ask what we bought. I will show him what we keep. The oldest captain did not nod. He did not need to, he understood the difference. Elder Marwin was named in the hall. The young one added, wary of bringing anything that smelled like smoke into the room. Old man at the door. Use of the word Stormvale wasn't casual. Ronan's jaw worked once, the memory of cold road and unspeaking seer rose and fell. He walks where he will. And if he walks here, then we will see what he has to say by saying nothing. It was not a joke, but the corner of the old captain's mouth tipped, because it was the right answer spoken in a way that kept fear from stiffening the room. They moved through assignments with the efficiency of men who knew that repetition is what keeps a house from burning, because a lamp tips at night. When the meeting broke, Ronan did not go first to the parapet or to the training ring. He went back through the arch toward the corridor that held the guests' rooms, not because he needed to check on a bowl of broth or a brazier's heat, but because the scent drew him and because refusing to turn his head toward it only made the pressure climb until it threatened to leak into other decisions. He paused before the open door. Saras sat on the cot with the cloak pulled close and the empty bowl on the plank table. Her hands rested palm up on her knees, rope burns clean and pink under new salve. Her eyes were on the window slit, not because the view was anything more than a line of dark trees and a slice of river, but because looking out helps a mind hold a line when the room is not yet yours. You ate? Yes. Good. Next sleep. I can work. You will, not now. He leaned a shoulder to the jamb. He did not cross the threshold. The rules he kept for himself were not the same as the ones he kept for other men, and he respected them more because they were his. Fang's law calls those under our banner guests until they break it, he said. Guests are fed, cleaned, given a bed and a blanket, and an hour without orders. And after the hour, we start learning what you are useful for. Her gaze slid to his face and then back to the slit. You bought me to use me. I bought you because leaving you there would have put you in Fang's hands by morning. Use is something we decide once we stop guessing. Is this where I thank you? No. They let silence look at them for a long breath. A draft slid along the floor. The brazier snapped once and settled. On the road, she said. You told me to speak to no one about what you think you smell. You remembered. You made it sound like a law. It is. What if I do not think it belongs to anyone's law? Then keep it for yourself until you know what it belongs to. His wolf pressed. Ask her if she hears it too. He did not. He had learned that pulling at a knot before it loosens itself makes it tighter. Fang will come, she said softly. He always does when he thinks something is his by right or can be made so by fear. And what do you do when he comes here? I remind him that rights end where my stone begins. He pushed off the jam and straightened. The room felt suddenly smaller with him in it, not from his height or breadth, but from the attention that filled the space between objects until there was barely room for air. You will be left alone for this hour, he said. If anyone tests that order, you will not need to answer. I will answer. He made the last words without heat, which made the promise sharper. He turned and left before the heat that rose up his spine could show in his face. In the corridor, Sable lifted his chin in question. Ronan shook his head once and walked out under the arch and across the yard to bleed the pressure into work. Saras stood and carried the bowl to the door, set it on the floor for whoever made rounds to collect, and then returned to the cot. The room's quiet had changed. It was not so much warmer as more held. She let her eyes close and trusted that sleep would offer her something more than blankness. The dream that rose was not one she could pretend to own. It came fast, like a hawk dropping out of a clear sky. Trees stood in ranks around her, trunks silvered by frost, branches black and fine as veins. Snow did not fall. It hovered in the air as if waiting for permission. A wolf moved between the trees, not a beast of flesh and heat, but a shape made of light that had learned how to be an animal for a night. Its pelt was silver, written with lines she did not know how to read, but knew were letters of a language older than mouth words. Its eyes were not a color that belonged to the world she had walked awake. Saras lifted a hand. The wolf did not come closer. It turned its head and looked toward a break between trees where a river split. Beyond the split, a ridge lifted its back and collected the wind on it like a cloak. The wolf breathed, and the breath sounded like a word her mind had not yet found. She woke with dawn on the slit window, thin and gray. The brazier had burned down to a bed of red beads. The room smelled of smoke and clean wool. The rope burns itched less. Footsteps in the corridor paused and then moved on, respectful of the order given and the hour not yet finished. Somewhere below, a hammer struck, and another answered, a conversation in metal. Somewhere above, a raven scolded the wind. She swung her feet to the floor and put her hands flat on her thighs. Breath in, breath out. The current that had worried under her ribs since the hall still ran. Not like panic, not like dread, more like a river adjusting to a new bank. Hold, the voice said again, and she did, without arguing. On the parapet, Ronan watched the south track unspool away from the keep and into the hills where men loved to vanish when they needed to feel like ghosts. He did not glance back toward the corridor where she slept. He did not need to feel the pull. His wolf stood with its forepaws on the wall inside him and stared the same direction he did, the wind flattening its ears. "Stormvale wins," the beast murmured, and for once the word felt like a thing that could be true, and not only a story old men used to hear themselves speak. He listened to the ridge. He listened to the river. He listened to the space between his ribs where the scent from the wagon had threaded and stayed. "Not yet," he told the animal and himself in the dawn. "But we will know what this is." The wind did not answer. It did not need to. It pushed from the south with the steadiness of a choice made in another valley and delivered to this one on time. The lawboards under the arch waited with the patience of stone. The men in the yard moved like muscles under skin. The hour would end and then the work would begin, and somewhere inside all of it, a line had already been drawn between a girl who had been sold for a laugh and the man who had bought her because she smelled like the kind of weather that changes a year. Smoke thinned to a gray ribbon off the brazier stones as morning steadied in the keep. Footsteps passed the open door in patient lines. Saras let the last of the heat brush her palms and stood, the cloak heavy in a way that steadied more than it weighed. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth left on the hook. The window slit showed the river's bend and a black seam of pines, all washed in early light that had not decided what kind of day to be. Derek came with a basin and a folded towel. His glance took in the room and landed on her wrists. He set the basin on the plank table, dipped the towel, wrung it once, and held it out. She cleaned the old salve and dabbed on the fresh ointment he had brought. "Breakfast in the lower hall. I can work after." "You will." Sable drifted across the corridor, nodded once, and continued toward the yard. Saras followed Derek along the stone hall. The air smelled of wax, wool, and a faint sting of lye. Hooks held cloaks cut to the same pattern, each repaired by the same careful hand. Order written in small things. The lower hall held long tables and benches worn smooth by years of elbows. A pot bubbled on the hearth, thick with oats and chopped apple. A woman ladled porridge into bowls and passed them with a slab of cheese and a heel of bread. Men and women moved through the line without noise meant to impress. The noise that lived was useful. Spoons on bowls, the crack of crust, a quiet reminder to a boy to keep his elbows in. Saras took a bowl at the end. The woman measured her quickly and fed her without comment. Saras found a place at the last table near the door. Derek set his bowl across from her and ate like a man who did not pretend food was more than fuel. Glances slid her way, curious and sharp, then turned as a door opened. Ronan stepped in with the weather at his shoulders, that same sense of wind entering with him. He crossed the room and lifted 2 fingers. Conversation sank a notch, not out of fear, but to make space for clear sound. 2 riders on the south switchbacks before light. They did not cross, they looked too long at it. "Vera will test our line. Keep your placements. Add 1 to the east ford at dusk." He turned. The tall warrior from yesterday rose half a hand on the bench, shaved scalp catching the hearth light, scars pale along his arms. "Alpha, word says Fang keeps a kennel of omegas for entertainment. The men ask what entertainment we brought home." The room held its breath. Derek's spoon paused. Sable leaned his shoulder to the stone so easily it looked like carelessness. Ronan did not turn all the way. He gave the warrior one eye. "If your mouth is bored, I can find hands work for it." A few low laughs rolled, quick and nervous. The warrior's jaw tightened. Ronan's gaze touched the table where Saras sat and returned. "She is under my banner. She is not a joke. Measure your words the way you measure your blade." The warrior's smirk died. He looked down and sat. Air moved again. Ronan left as if nothing had happened. Saras ate with a dry mouth and finished anyway. The oats were salted by a hand that knew where to stop. The apple was a clean surprise. When the bowl was empty, Derek pushed his aside. "You won't go anywhere alone," he said, stating weather. "Not because you can't walk straight, but because this place has lines you don't know. Men too." I understand. Good. He tipped his head toward the far door. Steward. The steward was a narrow man with clear eyes. He did not waste pleasantries. He walked Saras through the lower passage and storerooms in short steps that matched his speech. Laundry to the river twice a week. Tools stacked sharp edge down. Kitchen waste to the midden beyond the south wall, to keep wild wolves from sniffing close to the inner yard at night. He showed her the brooms and the clean rags and how to stack kindling so it dried even in damp. You'll start with water and floors, then kitchen prep. If your hands cut clean, the cook will keep you. If not, there's other work. I cut clean. We'll see. He handed her 2 buckets, wood staves polished by years of palms. She tightened the cloak and walked to the pump. The iron handle bit cold into her skin and worked like a muscle. Water groaned up and spilled bright into the bucket. Frost smoked at the lip. The tall warrior watched from the training ring with a knot of younger wolves. Saras lifted each bucket and set it down with care, back long, steps even. In the kitchen, the cook nodded at the water and pointed at sacks of onions. Even cuts, he said. Slow at first, then faster without losing even. She took the knife, tested its weight, and set blade to skin. The onion's sharp, wet smell jolted her eyes. She kept her breath steady and slid the blade so each half-moon fell like a neat tile. The cook lifted a palmful, let them sift, and grunted. You'll do. Hands know the difference between chopping and hacking. She finished the bushel and started another. Hands' work made thoughts go quiet. In the warmth and smell of stock and smoke, a colder thread ran, the one that had followed her since childhood, and risen strong in the hall. It threaded through everything as if the room had been built around it. Hold, the not-quite voice said, a strand made of breath. She did. The steadying in her chest felt like a river's bank rebuilt more true. Near mid-morning, Sable filled the kitchen doorway, part of the timber and yet unmistakable. Alpha wants the guest to see the lawboards. The cook waved a ladle. Go, she'll finish the roots. Sable led her to the inner arch. The carved marks sat under a bronze plate worn smooth where hands touched it. The air there held cold on purpose, a memory of winter to wake attention. Sable tapped a knuckle to each mark. We don't waste. We keep our word when we speak it plain. We don't leave our weak. Teach, guard, or cut loose in daylight where all can see. His finger hovered over the last, tucked near the edge like a secret that had decided to be public. This one is old. Older than Ronan. No fine translation. Leave room for what the ridge brings you. Stormvale, Saras said. Sable's gaze flicked to her face. You've heard the name. An old man used it at the door. I saw him once, Sable said. He looks like a fire that follows you around a house no matter how many windows you open. They turned from the arch. The tall warrior stepped into their path, practice spear under one arm, weight rocking heel to toe. You think this is a place to keep street finds? He said to Sable, eyes sliding to Saras and back. This is a place to keep what the Alpha keeps. He chooses fast. He thinks longer than you imagine. The warrior looked at Saras, finally actually looked. His eyes were not kind or cruel. They weighed. Do you know Fang? Enough. He'll send his mouth first, then his teeth. I know. He shifted the spear. Keep to lit corridors at night. Don't test doors you haven't been told to use. Don't drink from the south pump after dark. The ground there looks flat and isn't. Thank you. He blinked as if the word stuck to a scar. He stepped aside. By noon, the sky cleared and let a hard blue in, the kind that looks clean and cuts. Saras helped a boy haul fresh straw, then mended a torn saddle strap. Her hands remembered work. A body glad for use settles without collapsing. On the parapet, a raven clattered down, leather tied to its leg. A guard eased the strap and brought the roll to the lower hall. Ronan unrolled it. Clean, careful words. A Fang rider had crossed the east ford slow and showy, turned his horse, let it drink, and asked for Fang's greeting to carry back. Nothing else. No attempt to cross. No insult so plain it could be nailed to a board. The message under the message was the message. Ronan passed the strip to his oldest captain. Let him carry a greeting. Tie it to him the way we choose. What greeting? Our law. The captain smiled in his beard. We'll set a pot by the ford. Make him wait long enough to learn patience and short enough to keep him from believing we fear Vera's temper. Give him stew. Give him our steel. Set both where he can see and take neither. Sable tipped his chin from the doorway. Full night and 3 days if clouds don't cheat us. Ronan's breath tightened not with fear or anticipation, but with a calculation that had too many unknowns. He looked toward the corridor and away. She has not shifted. Not once. Keep her inside the inner yard at dusk. If the change comes early, I don't want a circle of boys watching something they aren't old enough to respect. I'll set women with her, ones who remember first nights. Good. His wolf stood inside Bone with head up. Eyes on a distance only they could see. The beast spoke with the weight of the ridge choosing where to hold snow. Protect her from me. I know what I am. I know what I can do when I believe I know better than law. Then set the law on yourself. He did. No one moved Saras without Derek or Sable knowing it. No door closed between her and the corridor without a second pair of eyes. No man crossed her threshold without a woman crossing first. It made him feel foolish and disciplined both, which meant the balance was right. The healer found Saras carrying folded cloth to the bandage room and looked her over with a frank gaze. How old? 19. Never shifted. No. Could be tonight, could be 3 days, could be next full. Drink water, not ale. Eat salt, meat, a little honey. Sleep if it lets you. When it comes, it feels like fever turned to lightning. You'll think you'll break. You won't. If anyone tries to tell you how, tell them to shut their mouth and hand you a blanket. Thank you. The healer pressed a strip of soft leather into her palm. Bite this. Not to save you from your teeth. To wake with your jaw whole. Saras curled the leather and felt the worn spots made by other hands. A line of heat ran up her spine. She tucked it into the cloak pocket. Clouds gathered their gray and pulled it close. Lamps opened under the arch and along the corridor. The steward finished his rounds faster than usual, more hands sharing tasks and finding excuses to pass in the same halls. The keep breathed higher in the chest. Sable walked Saras to her door. He leaned on the jamb and set his eyes to the corridor in both directions. You'll keep the door on the latch, knock if you need anything. Will you hear? I always do. Inside, the brazier glowed steady. A kettle sat near enough to warm. A cup waited, a small jar of honey beside it. She poured water, stirred in a finger of honey, drank, poured more. The sweetness filed the edge off the air. The first wave came like a warm wind that had lost its way. It wrapped her ribs and left with a small sting. She set the cup down and breathed. The second wave was cold so clean it burned. It moved through the long bones of her legs and arms as if mapping them for use. Her skin prickled with a pattern she could not see. Lines and marks not yet written on the outside. Hold, the first voice said. Come, the second said. She did both. She held the leather in her mouth and let the cold teach her body the shape of something older than fear. Behind her eyes, the silver forest from her dream stood still. Snow hung in the air like a thought that had not chosen to fall. A wolf stepped between the trees, not heat and flesh, but light that had learned to be an animal for a night. Its pelt carried letters she did not read yet. Its eyes did not belong to colors she knew. Sable's attention sharpened. He did not look inside. The door moved a fraction in the latch as if air had expanded. He closed his hand over the wood and kept it steady. A knock sounded from the gate tower. The guard leaned out and called down. A single rider at the outer line. No colors raised. A request to speak a name of peace. Ronan crossed the yard in long strides and climbed the tower. He took the stone lip and looked down. The rider sat his horse square, rein slack. He wore thorn fangs cut without colors, the way a man takes off a ring to claim he is not married in this room. He lifted a hand. "Shadowfang, I carry a question. The ford brings you stew and a fire. Ask the water, it will answer." A ripple of dry humor ran along the wall. The rider measured the gate with his eyes as if building a story to carry back. "Alpha Vera offers coin for what you purchased. He asks why keep what you do not know how to use." Silence gripped the stone. Men knew what their alpha would say, but some answers deserved full quiet. "Tell your master Shadowfang keeps what it will keep and gives lessons to those who ask without learning." The rider inclined his head more politely than the words deserved, turned his horse and left it a walk, because haste looks like fear from a wall. Ronan watched until gray took him. The wolf inside breathed against bone. "Claim her." "Not yet. Mine. When she chooses." The beast eased back, not sleeping. He was grateful for a pain he could choose. In the corridor, the surge rolled through Saras, not fire, but the bright break of ice on a river. She folded to the floor beside the cot and breathed around it. Sweat ran down her spine and her hands shook. The cold threaded her bones. Then heat returned to seal. She did not fall apart. She held. The wolf in the trees did not call or retreat. It waited. The wave passed. The room returned by degrees. The brazier's glow stepped close. The kettle ticked on the iron ring. She pulled the leather from her mouth and sat back against the bed frame and pressed her palms to her knees. Breath in. Breath out. The current under her ribs ran steadier, like water adjusting to a new bank. Sable tapped the door with two knuckles, not to enter, to mark the hour. She answered with the same rhythm. He leaned his head to the stone and listened to the keep settle. Ronan stood at the yard's edge and tilted his face to the east wind. The clouds tore enough to let the moon press a pale print against the dark. He did not smile, and did not admit fear. He chose the third thing, the one he had taught himself, when men with only two choices lost. He walked toward the corridor where the door stood on its latch and the guard's hand rapped it, and the woman inside learned a language her bones had always known. The night carried iron and river glass and something older than either, and it lifted the hair along his arms. He would not touch her threshold. He would not rush what had set its own pace. He would lift the law against himself when he needed it. He would watch the lines the wind drew and set his stones where they would hold. He paused at the turn and looked once toward the river and the pines beyond. The old man's rasp walked through his head again, that word like ash and winter. Stormvale winds. He let it sit. Then he went to stand where he could hear the smallest sound through the stone, not to intrude, but to keep his vow. He did not know yet why fate smelled like her, or why his wolf named her without permission. He knew he would find out. He always did. Morning arrived as a pale wash over stone, and Saras woke with the sense that the room itself was breathing. The brazier's ember glow painted copper along the wall, and caught on a faint dusting of silver across the inside of her forearms. It wasn't paint or ash. If she looked straight at it, it slipped away. If she glanced from the corner of her eye, it gathered like frost. Every sound seemed sharpened. Boots in the corridor sorted themselves by weight. The brazier's soft crackle had a rhythm. Farther off, water in pipes made a quiet hum she had never noticed before. Her palm brushed the strip of leather on the cot. The bite marks she'd left there had set as shallow valleys. Heat lifted through her fingertips, not from the leather, from her. Her wolf's voice rose clear and close for the first time. Not a dream, not an echo, a word that filled her lungs. Hold. She washed at the basin, wrapped the black cloak tight, and stepped into the corridor. Derek waited with a basin of his own, and that steady look he wore like a second uniform. He set the basin on a small stool near her door and studied her wrists. The rope burns were pink and clean from the healer's salve. Breakfast in the lower hall. I can work after. You will. Steward made a list just to feel calm. The hall smelled of wool, wax, and a faint bite of lye where someone had scrubbed before dawn. Hooks along the wall held cloaks of the same cut, each mended in the same small, certain stitch. Order lived here in details. In the lower hall, the porridge pot breathed steam. The hearthwoman moved bowls from ladle to hands with the rhythm of someone who knew how to keep a line moving. Voices were low and useful, spoons on clay, benches scuffing, someone reminding a boy to keep his elbows in, so he didn't spill into his neighbor's lap. Saras found a place at the end of a bench. Derek sat opposite and ate as if food were a tool, not a reward. Sable leaned on a post near the door, eyes cruising the room with lazy patience that fooled no one. The porridge was salted by a hand that knew where to stop. Bits of apple glinted like small decisions to be kind. The far door opened. Weather entered with Ronan. Conversation dropped a notch without anyone shushing it. He crossed the room, as if the floor had been built to meet his stride. Two riders watched the south switchbacks before light. They didn't cross. They learned the line with their eyes. Keep your posts. Add one at the east ford at dusk. A tall warrior with a shaved scalp rose a fraction. Word says Fang keeps a kennel of omegas for entertainment. The men wonder what we brought home. Spoons paused. Sable's shoulder found stone with the ease of a cat settling. Ronan didn't turn fully. Gave the man one eye. If your mouth is bored, I have hands work for it. A small ripple of laughter snapped and died. The warrior's jaw worked. Ronan's gaze touched the end of the bench where Saras sat and returned. She is under my banner. She is not a joke. Measure your words the way you measure your blade. The bench creaked as the warrior sat all the way down. Air moved again. Ronan left without looking back. The space behind him felt colder and cleaner, like a knife rinsed and set to dry. After breakfast, the steward appeared with his narrow face and clear eyes and turned on his heel to be followed. His steps were clipped. His rules were, too. Laundry to the river twice a week. Tools stacked sharp edge down. Kitchen waste to the midden beyond the south wall so wild wolves didn't nose the inner yard after dark. He pointed with his chin, not his hands. He placed 2 buckets in Saras's grip, wood staves polished by years of palms. The pump handle bit her palm with clean cold. Water rose and fell into the bucket bright and loud. Frost smoked along the rim. Across the yard, the shaved warrior stood in the ring with 3 younger men, practice spears under their arms. Their glances tried to be casual. Saras lifted the first bucket and crossed the yard with her back long, and her steps even. She set it by the kitchen door and returned for the second. Sable drifted into the frame of the scene like he had been painted there a century ago. The youngest of the ring glanced his way and then back down at his hands. Inside, the cook didn't look up when Saras set water by the hearth. He pointed with a knife at a burlap sack sagging with onions. Even cuts, slow at first, faster when you can do faster without getting sloppy. She tested the knife's balance and set the blade to skin. The onion bit her nose and eyes with clean, wet sharpness. She breathed steady and made neat half-moons. When the cook finally glanced over, he lifted a palmful and let the pieces sift through his fingers. You'll do. Hands know the difference between chopping and hacking. Heat from the range kissed her forearms. Under it, something cooler ran, a thin thread she had lived with for years without naming. Now it moved with her like breath. She kept to its rhythm. When the sack emptied, another waited. When the bench needed scrubbing, she scrubbed. When the back pot needed watching, she watched. The work filled time with the kind of quiet that gets things done. By an hour past sunup, the yard sounds braided into the day. Hammers, reins, boots, the thud of a body hitting the ring floor and getting back up. Saras gathered peeled roots onto a tray and pressed the kitchen door with her shoulder. The moment before the latch gave, prickles rose under her skin. Not heat, not cold, pressure. Light teased her forearms. Silver gathered and fled, like a thought that wouldn't be caught. Hold, her wolf whispered. She stepped into the light. Air cut cleaner outside. A young warrior with eager eyes and a neat scar along his jaw slipped from the ring and wandered across her path, smiling in the way boys smile when they're about to prove something they didn't know they needed to prove. "You work neat for a kitten." She kept breathing and angled the tray. He slid with her, still smiling. Two of his friends watered their mouths as a reason to linger by the trough. "Let's see those hands everyone keeps praising." She didn't lift them. He reached and closed fingers on her wrist. It wasn't a wrench, it wasn't cruel. It was the kind of touch that expected obedience. The moment his skin met hers, the pressure under her skin rose as if a seam had given way. There was no spark and no crack. The air changed pitch. The warrior flew backward as if a rope had yanked him from behind. He landed flat and slid under a bench. The bench hopped and clapped down. The tray in Saris's hands didn't so much as rattle. For a breath, the yard held itself still. Whispers follow faster than feet. Omegas didn't throw men. Omegas didn't throw anything. The warrior's friends stood and did nothing, stunned by the shape of what they'd seen. The young man under the bench tried to stand, sat back down, stared at the hand that had touched her like it was strange to him now. Derek took the space between Saris and the knot of bodies. He didn't lift an arm. He didn't need to. He stood in a way that made room for no one to pass. Sable leaned against a post with theatrical laziness that any smart man recognized as the stillness before a strike. "What happened?" the steward asked from somewhere already making new lists. "She tripped him," someone tried. "She didn't move." Another answered, too honest. "She shocked him," a third guessed, the word wrong but sticky. The cook stood in the kitchen doorway with a ladle in his hand like it was meant for skulls, not soup, and met nobody's eyes. Shame climbed Saris's spine because shame knows the root by heart. Fear curled cold in her throat. Beneath both quieter and more stubborn, something like pride set its feet. Not pride in the fall, pride that she had not dropped the tray when the world jumped. The young warrior managed to stand. He shook his hand like it had gone numb. He looked at her and away, as if looking might throw him a second time. Boots crossed stone with the intent that clears a path without asking. Ronan stepped through men who did not remember moving aside until after they had done it. The hum in Saris's blood shifted when his attention found her and the wolf in him came fully awake, a lift like breath before a sprint. "Ours," it said in him, iron certain. "Storm. Mate." "Quiet," he answered the beast and himself, and he read the yard. Bench askew, dust on the boy's back, Saris's wrist at the same angle, Derek's stance, Sable's eyes. The air around him drew tight and clean. Who touched her? The young warrior flushed to brick. The shaved veteran opened his mouth and closed it. Silence set, not loyalty. Reflex. The steward braced for orders. Ronan looked at the boy. "Are you injured?" "No. You will walk the outer wall twice before the midday meal, mouth closed, eyes open. If you still want to test something when you're done, ask Derek to teach you the difference between a task and a test." The boy swallowed relief and humiliation. He backed away like a man who'd seen a wild thing and believed it. The knot loosened. Work pretended it had never stopped. Ronan turned to Saris. He didn't step closer. The space tightened anyway, as if a line had drawn itself between them. The scent that had hooked him in the hall the night before coiled stronger now, threaded with an edge like cold lightning. What happened? I don't know. True and not enough. He watched for lies and found none. He watched the way her hands steadied, and the way the cloak he had put on her sat on her shoulders like a banner she had not agreed to carry. "Inside," he told Derek, eyes still on her. Derek nodded. The cook stepped back to clear the door. The steward collected the morning and pressed it back into columns. Sable let the last stare starve in his shadow, then drifted to the young wolf, rubbing his wrist. "You learned something. I won't touch her again." "Good. Learn the larger thing." The boy waited. When you don't understand a thing, your hands are the last tool you try. The boy nodded like he wished the sentence could be nailed into him. The corridor air held itself. Saris walked with Derek's quiet beside her. At a window slit, light angled in, and the silver along her forearms gathered again before it hid, like a school of small fish turning under water. She pulled the cloak closer, not to hide it, to keep it from running free. Her wolf pressed steady and clear. He is danger. I know. He is ours. No. Hold. Yes. Ronan waited at the mouth of the corridor, hands at his sides, posture as simple and dangerous as a loaded bow. Her scent moved through him and knocked once on old doors in bone he had nailed shut. He opened none. Come. He led her into a narrow room with a table scarred to smoothness and a map laid out in strict ink. The door closed with a clean click. He stood at the table's edge without blocking the exit. The map's inked river cut a line toward the east. His attention kept coming back to the girl in his cloak. You threw a man in my yard. I didn't move. What did you feel, Skill? Like a river in thaw. Pressure. A break. Quiet. He held the image. It matched the echo still traveling along his ribs. His wolf's teeth showed in something like a smile. Storm, the beast approved. Ours. Enough. Derek hovered long enough to be dismissed with the smallest tilt of Ronan's head. The room narrowed to 2 breaths and a map. You will not be touched without your leave. No one will use you to prove anything. If they try, they answer to me. The sentence landed in her chest with a weight she had never carried. A boundary laid in stone, not string. It didn't make her grateful. It made her steadier. I didn't mean for it to happen. I don't know how to start it or stop it or what it is. You will tell no one about the silver on your skin. Her breath caught. She had hoped the light hid it from most eyes. She lifted the cloak anyway, as if the wool could make a smaller target out of something that wanted to be seen. You are under my banner, he said. The words from last night changed shape as he used them. Less possession. More law. Until I understand what you are, the only story about you that leaves this keep is the one I write. It should have sounded like control. It did. It also made a wall she could lean against while the ground considered moving under her feet. Her wolf tilted its head. He binds us to keep us. He keeps us to keep us alive. Quiet, she told it, and it settled without complaint, which unsettled her more than the power had. Ronan watched her the way he watched a storm coming over the ridge. Command broke on weather. Survival did not. Her scent ran in him, and the beast curled with its muzzle on its paws, eyes up, waiting. Eat, he said at last. Work with the cook and the steward until dusk. Sable will be within a shout. Derek has the south wall and the yard. If the river turns again, come inside. Use the latch. 2 knocks for me. 1 for Sable. I don't want to be watched. You are. Better by mine than by men who need to prove they are not afraid. The truth fit too closely to argue. He glanced at her hands and saw silver dust gather and go, as if answering his attention. Not a word to anyone. I'll have the healer look at the boy, no more than that. She nodded. The air loosened enough to breathe. She put a hand to the latch and paused with a question that wouldn't lie flat. Why did you cover me in the hall? His jaw shifted like the word wanted to climb out, and he had no intention of giving it to her. You were under my roof. I don't share what's under my roof with men who come for jokes. That isn't it. It's enough. She didn't push. She left him with the map and the hum in his bones and a promise he had made without meaning to. Outside, the shaved warrior drove himself through drills until sweat brightened his scars. The young one found a broom like a penance. Sable stood where trouble liked to start and made trouble think twice. The steward rethreaded the morning into order. The cook kept a neat ship, his ladle a law in its own right. Saras set her hands to another basket of roots. The silver under her skin pulsed when she paid it too much mind and settled when she let work hold it. Her wolf breathed with her. Not a command now. A plan. Hold. She did. Derek found Saras in the kitchen near midday and rested 2 fingers on the table to catch her attention. The cook had set her to slicing roots again, and the rhythm had steadied her pulse. The sight of Derek's hand broke that rhythm without spilling it. Alpha asks for you. The cook slid the knife from her reach and wiped it on a cloth. Go, hands can live without you for an hour. Sable waited in the corridor with a posture that looked like ease and felt like stone. He fell in beside them as they walked. The keep's air cooled along the inner wall. A faint smell of oil and iron soaked the stair where men sharpened steel. They climbed 2 flights. At the top, a narrow window cut a slice of the sky. The light there was thin, the color of water before it freezes. Derek stopped at a dark door and lifted his knuckles. He didn't knock. He listened. When the silence on the other side shifted in a way he trusted, he opened and stood aside. Ronan's chamber was a map and a law set in wood and stone. A broad table held inked ridges, rivers, and small stones smoothed by many thumbs. An iron rack held weapons without fuss. A chair near the hearth had the look of a thing rarely used. The windows were narrow and high, made to admit weather and deny arrows. The scent here was leather, smoke, and the metallic chill roads wear in winter. He kept his eyes on her as she entered. The wolf inside him stood up behind his ribs and breathed. Closer. Saras stepped onto a rug faded by years of boots. She faced the table, cloak closed at her chest. The silence sat with them before anyone chose to move it. Her own wolf rose inside her chest and set its paws the way an animal does when it chooses not to run. Do you understand why you're here? I threw a man without moving. You did not throw him, you answered him. I didn't choose. You answered. The line he walked with those 2 words cut her skin cleanly. Her chin lifted before she knew it had. The silver dust on her forearms thought about waking. She kept her hands still and low. What did you feel? Pressure, a break? Quiet. What before the break? Heat that wasn't heat. Where? She tapped the base of her throat with 2 fingers and waited for his eyes to change. They did not. His gaze had that hard stillness he wore like armor when he let men think he had none. You held your tray steady. Something in me knew not to spill, the rest did not listen. His mouth didn't smile. Something behind his eyes did, quick and private, in the way a soldier notices discipline, even in chaos. He motioned to the stones on the map. She looked because looking at anything else made the air feel too thin. These are Vera's paths, he said, touching 3 stones with 1 finger. This one is where his men like to stand and watch our line. They don't cross unless they want to learn what water feels like when it closes over a foolish mouth. Today they watched longer than usual. Because of me. Because of me buying you, he corrected, almost gentle, and then stripped the softness from it. Because of the scent on you that does not belong to any pack I know. Because rumors run faster downhill than men do. Because Vera enjoys the look on a face when the truth arrives too late to be useful. Her wolf shifted. He is danger. I know. He is ours. No. Ronan's attention didn't flicker, but something inside him did. The beast pressed its muzzle to bone and spoke with a patience that made his jaw tense. Mark her before another mouth speaks her name. Law, he answered it. Not hunger. The beast retreated a pace and waited with its head up, eyes bright. Ronan reached for a second map and unfurled it until the table knew what to do with the weight. The ink here was older. Some lines had been traced by 2 different hands. A note in the corner had bled where snowmelt once dripped from a traveler's coat. Tell me what you dream. The question came without warning. It didn't belong with maps. It belonged with cold water and dark trees. She looked at the windows and back at him. Trees black as veins, frost on trunks, snow in the air that hasn't chosen to fall. A wolf made of light with letters in its fur I don't know how to read. What does it want? It looks toward a river split and a ridge beyond that keeps the wind for itself. It doesn't call. It waits. Sometimes it breathes a word. What word? Awaken. He folded the map back without taking his eyes from her face. Something old and unpleasant walked in his memory and took a chair without being asked. He let it. Ignoring certain guests makes them louder. You've been hearing your wolf. Clearer now. What does it tell you? He is danger. The words rose and went out before shame could stop them. He is ours. The faintest crack moved through the stillness around him. Not a sound. The shift that happens before sound. He closed his hands against the table's edge until the knuckles blanched and let go again. The beast inside him approved in a low rumble that did not need language. You understand the weight of that last word? I do. And still. I don't want what my body wants, she said. And the truth of it scraped her throat on the way out. I want to choose. You will. The certainty in his voice came so fast it startled both of them. He paused as if to examine the shape of what he had just built. He did not take it apart. Derek cleared his throat at the door, a sound that always carried news even when the words had not yet been spoken. He held a small leather roll. Ronan lifted 2 fingers. Derek entered, set the roll near the map, and left, without standing in the room any longer than gravity required. Ronan untied the roll and uncurled the strip. The ink was careful and dry. It asked for a meeting at the East Ford under a banner of peace. It used phrases that liked to pretend they were polite. It carried the weight of a man's grin that had never learned the difference between fun and cruelty. Vera wants to talk. He knows, Seris murmured before she could stop herself. He knows the shape of it. Ronan's eyes skimmed the words and stopped on a flourish meant to look humble. He will try for more. What will you give him? Time to learn patience. He turned the strip in his hands until the edge brushed a candle. The flame licked it, and the ink went brown, then gray. He held it until it burned close, then pinched it dead and let the black flakes fall into a small dish on the table. He sends a second messenger when the first is made to wait. We will feed the first and teach the second how to stand still. You feed men who come to test you. I feed my own law, he said and looked at her in a way that made her understand the sentence was bigger than food. Sable's silhouette moved past the window slit, a shadow smelling of rain. Below them, the keep worked. Chains at the gate lifted and fell. A horse tossed its head. Somewhere a boy laughed, cut himself off fast and went back to sweeping. Ronan shifted his attention back to her and let the silence do part of his work. Silence reveals what men say to themselves. He watched what she said to her own fear and found that it did not ask for mercy. It asked for a plan. You will keep the cloak. I wasn't planning to give it back. Good. You can't keep me from Fang with fabric. The fabric is for my wolves, not for Vera, he said. They read it as a sentence written in their own language. What does it say? Not yours. Her mouth warmed with almost smile and cooled. She pressed her fingertips to the table edge to keep them from showing the tremor that wanted to live there. Elder Marwin, he said, as if testing how her face moved around the name. You heard it last night at the hall. An old man said Stormvale wines you went still. I met him when I was young, once on a road with blood in the ditch and once at a ridge before a storm. He spoke less often than he looked. When he does speak, the year changes its face. Did he speak about me? He spoke about a wolf of storm and silver, he said, every word measured against a wall in his mind. Said she would break packs or bind them. He left before I could decide what he meant. And now you think I am that wolf. I think Fang will act like you are even if you aren't, he answered, and the honesty cut cleaner than flattery. My decisions are built on what men will do, not on what I want to be true. What do you want to be true? That I can move you where I need to without breaking you, he said, and then frowned at himself for the roughness of it. That I can keep this keep safe and keep you breathing until you tell me what you are, that my wolf can be denied without turning on me. You could order me to a cell, lock me in. I could, he agreed. I won't. I don't put storms in bottles. They break and cut hands when they do. Her wolf tilted its head again, listening to a word it liked. Storm, it repeated, not possession, description. Her breath went shallow and then evened. What do you want from me this hour? Eat again. Work until dusk. Listen to the quiet inside the noise. If you feel the river turn, come inside. No tests. No heroics. We are not impressing anyone. I never am. Good. He moved around the table and the room changed shape around his body. He didn't come closer than he had, but everything felt closer anyway. She realized the brazier near the hearth had not been lit since dawn. The room's warmth came from law more than flame. You will sleep with a woman on the other side of your door, he said. If the change comes early, you won't meet it alone. I don't want witnesses. You don't want an audience, he corrected. A witness keeps vigil and closes the window if the wind cuts too hard. She thought about the healer's strip of leather and the blunt kindness of the advice that had come with it. She nodded once. Anything else? You will look only to me for decisions about your body until I say otherwise. The words hung between them and changed the depth of the floor. She lifted her chin because her neck wanted to bow and she refused to let it. I am not property. You aren't, he said, and it cost him something to put the sentence in the air and not call it back. You are a law I haven't read yet. Until I can read it, I am the person who takes the blame if you are harmed. Blame is not the same as care. I know. The admission stripped pride to a clean line. It also made the room feel less like a trap and more like a place where choices might be made on purpose. Derek's shadow touched the threshold again. Rider at the East Ford. He uses peace words and keeps his hands high. He can keep them high for an hour, Ronan answered without looking away from Saras. Send Stew. Let him look at the steam and think about patience. Derek was gone before the last word settled. Ronan let out a breath that felt like it had been braced against his ribs since the door opened. The beast inside him pressed its head against his hand from the inside, wordless and intent. Mark her. No. Mate. When she chooses, he returned, and the certainty of it surprised him with its heat. He wanted to be the man who could keep that promise even if the keeping cost more than a scar. Saras drew the cloak tighter, not because she was cold, but because the weight helped her feel where her body ended, and the room began. She looked at the maps because maps were honest about their lies. They showed lines men believed in until weather corrected them. Will you meet Vera? I will choose when he asks the right question. Today he is only making shapes with his mouth. If he comes here. He won't, Ronan said. He likes stages and crowds. He doesn't like walls that don't need witnesses. You don't either. I like walls that listen. Her lips almost curved. These do. They do. He straightened and the room widened again. He looked at her as if fixing her in place on a map he kept inside his head. You may go. She didn't move for one heartbeat because something in her wanted to bow and something else wanted to bare teeth, and both were wrong. She inclined her head the bare measure courtesy required and crossed the rug. Her hand reached the latch. She hesitated as a word rose like a small animal. Thank you for the cloak. Keep it. She left. Sable stood in the corridor in the shape of a question. All right. For now. Kitchen. For now. He walked with her as far as the stairs and peeled off toward the parapet. Derek passed them going the other direction with 3 men behind him, each carrying a small bundle and a long patience. The keep breathed around them like a body that knew its work. On the lower landing, the steward barked a short instruction, and the hallway shifted left by 2 steps to make room for a barrel. The cook took one look at Ceres's face and slid a bowl toward her without asking what had been said. She ate standing, not because she was restless, but because the floor felt truer that way. The silver under her skin settled to a quiet gleam only she felt. Her wolf watched, not speaking. Outside, the yard's rhythm returned to hammers and rope. On the East Ford, a rider waited with rein slack and the look of a man told to stand still in a wind that didn't want to. A pot bubbled on a tripod within his sight and out of his reach. Steam lifted and curled and vanished. A shadow Fang guard stirred and tasted and made no sign. The river ran under a skin of thin ice and thought about what it would do after dark. Ronan stood on the parapet and watched patience eat a man. The beast placed its head on its paws and kept its eyes on a door 2 floors below. Mine. Law, he answered, and let the battle between those 2 words fill his chest without breaking anything. Dusk gathered in the keep like breath held too long. Lamps opened one by one under the arch and along the corridor, small circles of patient light. The river beyond the north slit of Saris's narrow window flattened the last of the day into a strip of dull glass. Sable walked her to the guest room and leaned on the jamb while she stepped inside. The brazier had been coaxed to a steady glow. A kettle sat near enough to warm without boiling off. A cup and a small jar of honey waited on the plank table, as if someone had set the night in order. Lamp stays on the latch. Knock if you need anything. I will. He tapped the door twice. A quick rhythm that meant I am here, not I am entering. His shadow stayed in the hall. Saras shut the door to its latch and rested her fingers on the rough wood. The room smelled of clean wool, smoke, and the faint bitter of the healer's salve still working on her wrists. She poured water from the kettle. Steam loosened into the air and vanished. She stirred in a finger of honey and drank. Warmth slid under her ribs and thinned the tightness there. She sat on the cot and let the weight of Ronan's cloak settle across her knees. The black wool carried an iron scent under cedar and cold air. She kept her spine straight and her hands open on the fabric until the urge to hide inside it learned its place. Hold. Her wolf breathed, close enough to feel like her own lungs moving. I am. In the yard below, the steward's voice separated men into useful lines. Derek's steps traced the south wall with the patience of someone who trusted routine to keep a house standing. The cook banked coal so dawn would be easy. The shaved veteran wore the ring thinner with drills until sweat turned his scars pale. The eager boy pushed a broom in straight rows like penance and practiced both. Ronan crossed the yard without speaking. Men noticed him without staring, the way a field notices wind. He stopped under the inner arch where the Lawboards lived, the cut marks looking older in lamplight. His fingers hovered near the smallest one tucked close to the edge. The mark Sable translated into plain tongue. Leave room for what the ridge brings you. Tonight it felt less like superstition and more like instruction. South watch tight, Derek reported, quiet and sure. East path quiet. Good. Talk from the hall. Derek added without weight. The bearded fool will run to Thornfang as if he invented news. Let Vera hear the version we decide, Ronan said. Double posts at the ridge and the ford at first light. Tonight we keep our own breath. Derek moved on. Sable brushed past and angled his head toward the guest corridor in a way that meant all is steady. Ronan climbed to the parapet. Wind met him with clean teeth. The river tried to set a skin, failed, tried again. Pines held the last blue like old promises. From here the keep looked less like a wall and more like a back braced against weather. Ours, his wolf said, blunt as iron, she is the storm. Take her before men with soft hands make her small. Not tonight. Claim. No. Refusal did not soothe, it steadied. He put law between want and hand, and let the cold keep him honest. Saras listened to the house the way others listened to songs. Metal lofted a brief bright note and died. A laugh moved along the corridor and softened when it reached her door. The brazier whispered like a creature content in its task. She worked the salve lightly into the rope burns and watched the skin settle. Elder Marwin slid sideways through her thoughts. The ash-bright eyes, the name that had made Ronan go still. Are you afraid of him, she asked the wolf. Not of the old man, of what he names, and what is that? Us. The answer should have chilled. It steadied her spine instead. She drew her feet up and tucked the cloak under her calves. The leather strip lay near her hand. She turned it once and set it down. Downstairs, the cook drew the coals into a neat spine. The steward counted sacks and marked a slate. Derek oiled a hinge that liked to talk at the wrong hour. If the keep had a prayer, it was work done carefully. A thin cloud slid and let the moon press a pale sheet along the inner wall. Light tried to climb the slit of Saris's window and fell back. She closed her eyes so she could listen better. If sleep came, It could find her ready. If something else came, she would meet it sitting up with her hands open on her knees. Dream rose without dragging. Trees stood like ink lines in clear cold. Frost traced them to silver. Snow hung in the air and did not fall. The wolf moved between trunks, light written into bone and muscle. Letters ran along its pelt like water writing. She could not read them and did not need to. It stopped at the bend where the river split. Ice flexed and held. Beyond, a ridge lifted its back and caught wind like a cloak. The wolf turned and looked at her. It opened its mouth and let a word out like breath. Awaken. Cold ran up her arm and into her sternum like a map laid from the inside. The feeling chose rightness over pain. She woke with her palm on her chest and the brazier laying copper on the floor. For a heartbeat, Silver thought about returning to her skin and did not. She set her feet to the stone and kept her breath level. Hold, her wolf said again, and now its voice carried her voice inside it. We are closer. Not yet. Soon. Sable's knuckles tapped the door, the same steady rhythm. She answered with 2 taps and lifted the cup to finish the last of the salted honey water. The sweetness filed the air's edge. She breathed with the keep's slow thud under the floor until her shoulders let go 1 notch. On the parapet, a raven flapped down with its graceless clatter. The guard untied thin leather from its leg and vanished into the tower. A moment later, the oldest captain crossed the lower hall with a small roll. Ronan uncurled it by lamplight. The words asked for a meeting at the East Ford under peace phrases worn thin by use. The part that mattered had no ink. It wrote in the timing and the route, and the rider who had waited all afternoon without crossing. Deny the meeting, Ronan told the captain. Send Stew in a seat. Make him stand to eat it. If he asks again, he can ask the river. The captain's mouth tipped. He left without the strip. Ronan brushed a candle to the leather and held it until ink browned and then blackened. Ash flaked into a dish. Smoke curled, clean and thin. Threat, the wolf pressed. I know. Keep mark, law. The beast settled to a coil that did not release. Ronan walked back under the sky because Rooms had learned too much of his breathing. Night took hold. Lamps narrowed the yard to islands of light with dark water between. Saras wiped the last dry blade and turned toward the door. Sable was there as if he had grown out of the stone. Walk you? I can find it. I know. They crossed in companionable quiet. The shaved veteran tipped his chin. The eager boy kept his eyes on the broom's neat rows. The wind came in from the east with a dry pine smell. Near her door, the healer waited with a small pot and a wrapped parcel. Drink, the healer said, passing a tin cup with water warmed enough to be kind. Salt and honey. Keep the leather near. If it rushes you, breathe. Don't argue with it. Let it do its work. I don't want an audience. You won't have one. You will have help if it comes fast. The healer walked on, basket clinking softly against her knee. Sable's attention drifted toward a sound farther down the corridor and returned when it died. He touched the lintel twice. Saras answered and stepped inside. The room held its own small weather. Heat moved like a creature that had found its spot. The window slit kept a pale slice of sky. She sat, listened, waited. Time taught her nerves back into shape. The first wave came like a warm wind hunting its home. It wrapped her ribs and left. The second came cleaner, cold so bright it burned. It moved through the long bones of her arms and legs as if mapping them for later. Silver gathered faint along her forearms, then faded when she stared. She set the cup aside and rested her fingers on the leather to remind her jaw she would not need it unless the moment demanded. Outside, the rider at the East Ford stood with reins slack, while Stew steamed just beyond reach. The guard stirred and did not serve. Patience works on a man in ways that show later. The river kept its thin shell and waited for a heavier hour. Ronan walked the inner wall and stopped where the corridor stood like a throat. He set his shoulder to the stone and listened. Sable, already there, glanced once, and then watched the hall again. The two of them held the space the way men do when they refuse to call it a vigil and do it anyway. The change arrived like a current under ice. Ronan felt it before he knew he was feeling it. The beast surged and set its paws and spoke with that dangerous certainty. Mate, goddess, ours, quiet law, wait. Sable looked up at the same heartbeat. He didn't need to ask. Air shifted its weight. The old stones turned their faces toward the same door. He knocked twice, soft. 2 soft taps answered. He did not open. He set his palm to the wood to feel another breathing. Ronan stood at the threshold because anywhere else was a lie. He didn't touch the latch. He put his hand to the stone beside the door and let the cold pull some heat out of his blood. Seris, I'm here. I'm all right. Do you want the healer? No. Do you want anyone? No. Do you need anything? Time. You have it. He stepped back because nearer would invite a truth he refused to take through a door. Sable slid his weight and kept the wall. Inside, the silver along Seris's skin brightened once, then learned itself back to a duller light. Her wolf stood with her as part of the room. We are more, it said. We are storm. I hear you. The lamp breathed steady over the latch. The brazier held its task. She lay down and kept her eyes open until edges softened again. Sleep visited and retreated and visited again. When it stayed, it carried the river and the ridge and the wolf of light. When it left steadiness behind. On the tower above the ford, the guard finally set a bowl within the rider's reach and then took it away again, not as cruelty, as lesson. The rider stiffened, then stilled. The river hummed under ice. A raven tucked its beak and grumbled. Ronan kept his place until cold worked to the bones in his hands and thinned the heat enough that he trusted himself again. He laid his palm flat to the wood once. Quick. I will keep the door. I know. He left the corridor, because staying would invite hunger to call itself duty. Sable filled the absence like the space had been built for him. The stone under the lamp felt warmer than before. Saras slept at last like someone who had chosen to. Her hand rested on the leather without needing it. The last thought that carried her over was simple and stubborn. I will not break for them. Under the arch, the smallest mark on the Lawboard kept its cold and its quiet. Leave room for what the ridge brings you. The night did. The pack slept. The lamp on Saris's latch burned small and steady. Ronan watched the south line from the parapet and let the wind scour his lungs. The beast in him stayed awake with its eyes open and spoke once more with a certainty that could ruin a man or make him, mate, goddess, ours. Not by hunger, he answered. By choice. He tested the weight of those words and decided he could carry them. When he looked south, he imagined the grin Vera would wear when rumor reached him and let it fade. He would not fight talk with talk. He would fight with what he controlled. His walls, his wolves, his hands. The law he had built plank by plank so that when old stories walked into his yard, they would find an older language already standing. He breathed in cold through his teeth and made the vow he meant to keep. He would uncover why fate had bound him to a strange, defiant Omega, who smelled of the goddess, and no one else would write that answer for him. Morning thinned the dark to a low gray and laid a quiet shine along the stone. Saras opened her eyes to the steady glow of the brazier and the soft scrape of wind under the window slit. The cloak over her legs was heavy and warm. When she lifted her forearm, a faint dusting of silver winked beneath the skin, there and not there, like frost that hides if you look straight at it. She pulled her sleeve down and breathed until her ribs remembered their rhythm. Hold, her wolf murmured, close and calm. I am. She washed at the basin, tied her hair back with the strip of cloth hanging from the wall peg, and slipped into the corridor. Sable leaned opposite her door as if the stone had grown him in the night. He didn't block her path. He didn't pretend not to be there. All right. For now. Kitchen first. He peeled away like a shadow with errands. In the lower hall, the pot breathed steam. oats turning thick around chopped apple. The hearthwoman slid bowls along with practical grace. The room smelled of lye, wool, and wood smoke. The steward moved through with a slate under his arm, making marks without slowing. Derek stood near the doorway, scanning faces the way he checked wall posts. Quiet, thorough, unhurried. The shaved veteran had already sweated through first drills. Pale scars laddered his forearms. The eager young wolf kept his eyes on the bench he was moving, focused tight and deliberate. Saras took her place at the end of a table. The porridge was salted exactly right. She lifted the spoon, aware of the hush that followed her like a second cloak. Two women at the next bench lowered their voices just enough to make sure she knew they were speaking. Quiet morning. Storm quiet. A storm that glows. She ate anyway. The spoon's curve gave her something simple to do with her hand. The cook appeared in the doorway, measured the level in the pot with one glance, and tipped his chin toward the kitchen. She rinsed her bowl and followed him to the back. Onions, even cuts, watch your fingers, watch your thoughts. I will. The knife fit her palm. Skin slipped. Half moons fell in neat tiles. The sting in her eyes was clean and ordinary. Her wolf watched with a patience that matched the rhythm of the blade. For a time the kitchen swallowed the morning whole and returned it as work. When the steward came to count sacks, he paused a heartbeat longer than yesterday, measuring something numbers don't hold, then moved on. Outside the door a mutter drifted, the tone meant to carry. Bought trouble. Alpha thinks trouble is a pet. He thinks he's the only one who can teach it tricks. Sable's voice cut the knot without rising. If your hands aren't full, I can fill them. Tools scraped. Footsteps reconsidered. Saras kept slicing. The silver under her skin stayed quiet long enough that she almost forgot to watch for it. On the last onion, a soft heat rose along her forearms. More reminder than warning. She breathed and let it pass like weather. The cook sifted a handful of pieces and let them fall. You'll keep. She wiped the board, carried peelings to the waste pail, and shouldered the water buckets. The yard met her with cold air that tasted faintly of iron. The shaved veteran turned the spear with precise economy. The eager young wolf raked straw with the same care he might have used to cut meat. A knot of warriors lounged by the armory door, loose in the way men stay loose when they plan to harden fast if given an excuse. A woman in a patched jerkin stepped across Saras's path before the pump. Grease smudged one cheek. Her eyes carried the tired heat of someone who burned through patience years ago. You drag your feet like you own the ground. I'm carrying water. Cursed water, the woman said, tilting her head so the others could hear. Shimmering skin and a smell that doesn't belong to decent wolves. Fang calls you entertainment. What do we call you? Seris? Not a name, a problem. We put problems where they can't break what we're building. Move on, a man muttered, not eager to follow his own advice. Steward won't like a scene. The steward can count with his back turned, the woman answered, eyes never leaving Saras. Say something then. Make it worth the trouble you brought. Her wolf pressed up behind her ribs with cool certainty that made room in her chest. Hold. No fear. Saras set the buckets down. The pump handle bit her palm with clean cold as she drew water. The woman took a slow step closer, as if proximity could make shame grow in another body. Show us your trick, Glowwolf. I don't have tricks. You threw Mala without moving. I didn't. I don't want to find out how again, the eager boy said from the straw, keeping his eyes on the broom. The ring around the pump tugged taut. Someone laughed once, a chip of glass. The woman's mouth curled. Cursed. The sound scraped old places in Saras that used to bleed at a touch. It found only a scar and the memory of pain. Heat rose behind her eyes and dropped into her hands, into the fine bones of her wrists, into the steady grip she had learned when even breathing felt like asking permission. Don't, her wolf whispered, not a command, a hand hovering near a friend's shoulder. If you push, push small. The air hummed without sound. It was that river feeling again. The moment ice breaks and pressure releases. It didn't flare outward. It settled inward into stillness. Voices cinched into a thin band, then stopped altogether. The pump's squeak went silent. Up on the parapet, a raven cocked its head and shut its beak. Saras didn't lift her head. She finished filling the first bucket, slid it aside, started the second. Eyes burned against her skin and slid off. Footsteps crossed stone with intent that was neither hurry nor hesitation. The yard noticed Ronan before anyone turned. The knot around the pump loosened without admitting it had. The woman's jaw set. Ronan tasted the air and knew enough. The wolf inside him stood and pressed both forepaws to his ribs. Claim her now before another mouth makes a name. Law, he answered in the space where breath lived. Hold. He took in the woman, the boy, the veteran, the way Sable leaned at the arch with his weight exactly where it should be. He looked at Seris last. That odd, clean scent that had hooked him in the auction hall had a metal edge now, like air after lightning. He set his voice to the pitch the yard obeyed. She is mine, my law is hers, question her and you question me. The words hit like a beam set across a doorway. Men stopped because the opening had changed shape. The woman stared a breath too long, then stepped back as if the ground had shifted under her boot. Work keeps, Ronan added to no one and everyone. Idle mouths do not. The steward lifted his slate in the background as if that finished a line he had been writing all morning. Derek set his attention on the south wall again, not relieved for Saras so much as for the return of pattern. The eager boy bent to the broom with wholehearted dedication. The shaved veteran spun his spear and set its point a measured inch from the urn post. Sable let a breath leave his nose and slouched deeper into the arch in a pantomime of boredom no one believed. Saras lifted the second bucket. Her pulse beat in her forearms, but the silver lay quiet, as if content to be remembered instead of seen. She turned toward the kitchen door. Saras. She faced him because not facing him would be a kind of bow. He measured her the way he measured the east ford on a map, all depth and current and what might cross without warning. Inside him, the wolf pressed again, wordless, heavy, steady, working. A muscle eased along his jaw. Not quite relief, more like a decision made and filed. He turned to the wall. Usefulness reclaimed the yard. Inside, the cook assessed the buckets and the hush that followed them in. Backhook. Stir until it speaks. Don't let it lie. She set the pot and stirred. The stew answered with a lift and fall that felt like breathing. Her hands found the rhythm, and the ribbon of heat that had threatened to do harm learned how to be warm instead. When the healer stopped to trade a bundle of dried leaves for a half loaf, her eyes went to the clean skin where rope had burned yesterday. Saras waited for judgment, and heard only inventory. Salt at the end, the healer offered, spoke into the room. Not the beginning. Saves the meat. Noted, the cook said. Practical. Unadorned. By mid-morning, word of what had not happened passed through the keep in shapes to suit each mouth. Some said the Omega flashed light and made men dumb. Some said the Alpha cowed them with a look. Some said nothing and watched the way Saras's shoulders stayed straight while she carried water like anyone else. The eager boy edged near the kitchen and pretended to study the shelf with the cups. Sorry. For what? Being curious with my hands. Keep them, she said, and turned the stew. He almost smiled, remembered himself, and took his broom like a prize. The steward brought a list and set it by the board without comment. His finger tapped a line that read corridor floors. She took the pail and brush and walked the inner passage where the lawboards threw hard shadows. The smallest mark tucked near the bronze edge looked different in daylight than by lamplight, as if the sun had tried to understand and failed and forgiven itself. Leave room, she thought, and her wolf leaned against that idea, pleased. At the far end, Elder Marwin's name flickered through memory. Ash-bright eyes, the word that had made Ronan go still. Stormvale winds. She scrubbed as if the letters running along the wolf's coat in her dreams could be coaxed up through her hands. When she finished the last stretch, the steward appeared the way men do who arrive exactly when they intend. Yard? Now. Outside, forms moved in the ring. Derek circled with a count in his head. Sable watched the armory door from the shade. The woman from the pump sharpened blades with more force than sense, each stroke a complaint disguised as duty. The shaved veteran noticed Saras and did nothing which felt like courtesy. The boy's broom drew a neat line that ended at her boots. Training ring, Ronan called, not to shout but because the ring listens best to a voice used to its shape. She set the pail down and crossed. The hush that followed wasn't the same hush as before. It carried more calculation than fear. He stood with his weight balanced and his attention blunt as a blade laid flat. You will tell me if that pressure rises again before it breaks? I'll try. You will. Her wolf lifted. He is danger, it warned. He is also the wall. Do not lean too hard. Ronan's wolf came up with a snarl that shook him less than it should have. Mark her. Bind power and name. Silence. He stepped close, not enough to loom. Cedar and cold iron threaded the air from his cloak. His hand lifted, stopped, then hovered above her wrist like instinct had been caught by the scruff. May I? She nodded. Refusing would teach the wrong lesson to too many watching eyes. His fingers closed lightly around the small bones. Heat leapt skin to skin. No burn, no flash, only a certainty that made her knees feel new. At the edge of her vision, something pale flickered. A faint glow threaded under his hand where it met her pulse, a sketched ring that vanished when she blinked. Her wolf breathed one word like a struck bell. Mate. Ronan's wolf lunged. Ours. He let go as if the contact had been a blade he'd grasped by the edge. The ring pretended to drill harder. Sable's head tilted a degree. Derek's count stumbled and recovered. Enough, Ronan said, and the word was for himself. Understood. The moment wanted to swell into a story. Seris refused it air. She picked up her pail. The world returned to bodies, breath, and clipped orders that keep a house standing when weather tests it. The sun pushed free of a thin cloud and set a white edge along everything. A raven shook its soot wings on the parapet and watched like a creature that sees stories as meat. The sheen along Saris's skin did not return. Her hands steadied. The pulse at her wrist found a quiet that didn't feel like hiding. The cook whistled her back with 2 fingers. Taste. Thin. She salted at the end as the healer advised. The broth shifted from honest to good. The healer's shadow crossed the door again and paused. Approval, the size of a single heartbeat. In the corner, the boy arranged bowls into a neat stack and, after a second's thought, added one more. Outside, the woman from the pump carried a bundle of oiled rags past the threshold and let a sentence hang in the air like dust. Storms break roofs. Roofs built right hold. Sable answered from the arch without looking up. She snorted and went on. By the time bells marked midday, the keep had absorbed the morning and decided to keep moving in spite of it. Men ate in the lower hall and let shoulders drop one notch. Derek checked the south gate hinge and made the sign that was schedule, not superstition. The steward wiped chalk from his fingers and turned his slate to a new page. The shaved veteran finally let his spear rest. The boy drank water like a prize. Saras carried bread to the tables and felt the hush that followed her change shape. It wasn't warm, it wasn't welcome, but it wasn't sharpened to draw blood either. She could live with that. She set half a loaf by the woman and moved on. The woman's mouth twitched like a muscle, remembering it knew more than one expression. At the end of the table, Ronan stood with bread in hand, not eating, measuring. He didn't call her over. He didn't need to. His presence went where he meant it to go. After the meal, he said into the room, a simple plan more than an order. Posts rotate. Watch the east and the high road. Keep your mouths closed and your eyes open. Heads rose, nodded, lowered. The room exhaled. Saras turned toward the kitchen. Pride pricked beneath her ribs, not the kind that swells, the kind that steadies. Her wolf approved with a small sound like a hand on her shoulder. You did not bow. I do not break for them. Good. She set the tray down and reached for the ladle. The brazier breathed. The stew whispered. Outside, the raven dropped onto the parapet again and lifted a foot to show a thin leather tie against the stone. The guard sighed and went to fetch it. The keep shifted its weight the way a body does when it knows another test is coming. Seris kept stirring until the pot spoke back in a contented rhythm, and for the first time that morning the silver in her skin felt less like a secret and more like a story choosing when to be told. The hall emptied in an orderly drift, benches scraped, bowls stacked. The steward wiped his slate clean with the same care he'd use on a blade. Outside, the yard resumed its rhythm, the ring full of bodies practicing the same forms until muscle made them law. Seris carried the last tray to the kitchen and felt calm return through the simple weight in her hands. The cook nodded toward the back hook. Leave it, you're called. By who? Alpha. The word did not thump. It settled. Sable appeared at the door as if he had grown from the hinge. Come on. They crossed the yard through the narrow channel that opens when a place knows where people belong and makes room without a fuss. The shaved veteran shifted a pace to let them pass, eyes forward, attention precise. The eager young wolf bent over a coil of rope with the intensity of a man speaking to it. Derek's gaze clipped along the wall, counting posts as if the numbers lived in his spine. Ronan stood at the far edge of the ring where the ground packed harder and held a memory of old drills. He wore no cloak now, just the plain dark of training clothes, the clean lines of someone who had never needed ornaments to keep attention. He lifted 2 fingers. The nearest wolves faded back without looking like they were retreating. Sable stopped near the armory door. Derek lingered within sight, hands behind his back in a stance that let him react without announcing it. The healer's shadow slipped to the corner under the overhang and rested there with a basket against her knee. Here, Ronan said. Saras stepped into the ring. The earth gave under her boots with a familiar firmness. She waited, breath even, shoulders level. The wind carried pine and iron. You are not here to be punished, he said. You are here to be read. I don't know my letters yet. You will learn them. He paced a short arc, measuring distance more than deciding what to say. The wolf inside him lifted, fixed its eyes on her, and breathed a single word that pulsed like another heartbeat. Mate. Quiet, he told it, but the command lacked the anger it had held last night. He pulled his attention back to the exactness of his plan. Tell me again what you felt in the yard. Pressure, a break, quiet. What before the pressure? A change in the air, the way a room sounds when someone lifts a knife even if you can't see it. Where in you? Here. She touched the base of her throat, then the line under her ribs. It moves like water being asked to run uphill. He nodded once. We will not ask you to break, we will ask you to name. Name what? Signals. How the body speaks before it acts. She stood still and let his words settle into something she could use. The ring's hum softened. Sable's attention became a kind of roof. The shaved veteran anchored the far edge with his steadiness. The boy's broom paws said he was listening, though his eyes stayed on the ground. The healer's basket made a soft clink that sounded like preparedness. Ronan drew a slow breath. Close your eyes. She did. Air came in clean. The ground tilted a hair the way it does when a person you are aware of takes one step closer in silence. He waited until he could feel her listening to the weight. Open. She did. The distance between them had not changed. The attention had. He held his hands loose at his sides. When I move, name it. He shifted weight to the balls of his feet. Wind. He shifted to his heels. Wall. He turned his left shoulder an inch. Knife. He let his right hand rise a fraction, palm open. Offer. He kept testing the edges of motion, breath, balance. The tiny tells men have before they act. She named them in low words that did not pretend more certainty than she felt. When her answers slowed, he changed the exercise. Now you move. You stop before your body asks for the break. She set her weight forward. Pressure rose at her collarbone and eased when she halted. She lifted one hand. A hum trembled along her forearm, subtle as a thread under cloth. She stopped. The hum faded. Again. She repeated it until she felt pathways she hadn't known were there, as clear as tracks in snow. Each time she ceased before the crest. Each time the crest lessened. Sweat began at the base of her neck and slid down in a ticklish line. The silver beneath her skin did not show. It listened somewhere deeper. Ronan watched for the place where fear entered the body and found he could not. She wasn't fearless. She was disciplined. He felt the rough pride that rises when a soldier does a hard thing the right way and makes it look simple. His wolf pressed its muzzle to bone. Take her, it urged, and bind the power to our name. Law, he answered. And time. Her breath shifted and he raised a hand to stop her, not because he feared what would come, but because this was enough for now. Drink. Sable tossed a skin. Ronan caught it without looking and passed it. Seris drank, and the water steadied the quiver in her chest. Good, he said, and the single word traveled quietly as permission. Now tell me about last night. The wolf in the trees made a word in the air. The marks on my skin woke. They learned to dim when I asked. It hurt, and it felt right. Both. Do you feel anything now? Something that wants to be a tide, and what keeps it? Work, she said, holding my breath like a tool, not a weapon. The thought that if I break, someone else cleans the mess. He looked at her as if the sentence were a map of a country he had never cared to cross, and now needed to draw. A corner of his mouth moved as if he registered the humor of a truth, and wasn't ready to spend it. You don't answer instincts with instincts, he said, you answer them with law. That's what you tell yourself. It's what I have lived long enough to believe. His gaze went past her just for a moment to a winter road where an old man with ash-bright eyes had spoken a sentence and changed a year. He hadn't thought of Elder Marwin as a teacher. He thought of him as a weather that gave warnings without apology. Storm veil winds. The phrase moved through Ronan now, and set something loose in his chest that felt like acceptance and refusal both. He stepped closer by a pace, not enough to crowd her, enough that the air between them had only one name. He extended his hand again, palm up. May I? You may. He took her wrist. The contact this time did not leap. It arrived. Warmth rose and circled his fingers. A faint light bloomed where his skin covered her pulse, thin as a drawn ring, then dimmed as if listening to their restraint. The world compressed around that single living point. The wolves inside both of them spoke at once. Mate, hers breathed. Reverence cut through with warning. Ours, his growled, satisfied and hungry at once. He did not flinch away this time. He held a heartbeat longer than wisdom, shorter than his wont. He felt the line of the bond tug like a rope thrown from a moving boat. He could tie it. He could let it drag him. He could cut it and drown. None of those were law. He released her and stepped back into the exact center of himself. Seris did not sway. She hated and loved the loss of contact in the same breath. The ghost of the ring throbbed once under her skin and faded. What does it mean? She asked, not as a plea, as an inventory. It means there is a road. It does not mean we must walk it today. What if we wait too long? Then we will learn what waits does to roads. The word tasted bitter in his mouth. He wanted to take her shoulder and write his name on the story now, before Vera's men could shape it with theirs. He also wanted to put 6 doors and the Lawboard between her and any force that would call itself fate. Which one would decide what kind of man he still was. A movement at the ring's edge gave him an excuse to breathe. The shaved veteran lifted 2 fingers, a sign that meant the outer posts were set early. Derek nodded once and shifted, the kind of translation of signal that keeps houses standing. The eager young wolf pretended to be entirely occupied with rearranging the rope coil. The healer shifted her basket from one knee to the other and returned to stillness. Ronan's attention returned to Saras. "Again," he said, softer. She raised her hand an inch and stopped before the tide crested. He watched power learn a quieter shape in her. Twice more, 3 times. On the 4th, the air stung with the memory of lightning. He lifted a hand and she stopped. The sting evaporated like mist in cold. "We'll end here," he said. "You've learned enough for one day. You're afraid I'll break your ring if I keep going. I'm afraid power will make its own law if we teach it too quickly." She considered that and set the knowledge down where it would not bruise. The wolves inside them quieted the way animals do when weather changes, and they have no choice but to wait under trees. A voice rose near the armory, careful and small. The eager boy stood as if the rope had told him something. "Do you need the pail carried?" "Carry it," Ronan said, not unkind. The boy moved like he had been told he could join a real thing. Sable took 2 steps forward and met his eye halfway. "Keep your curiosity where your hands can survive it." "I will." He went off with the pail like a man carries a banner that no one else can see. The ring settled. Ronan gestured toward the shade. "Walk." They crossed to the inner wall. He didn't speak for a dozen paces. She didn't press. At the base of the lawboards, he stopped with his hand near, not touching. "If you cannot stop the break in time," he said, eyes on the marks as if reading a manual meant for this moment, "you will go somewhere with stone and air and room. You will not be alone. You will not be watched by boys who will turn the shape of your pain into a contest. You will not try to impress me." "I'm not trying to impress you." "Good. You are trying to convince yourself the law you made will hold when other laws arrive." "I am." He looked at her then, because a lie would ruin more than a day. There are only so many times a man can say what he is and remain it. "You will eat," he added, "then rest. If your sleep feels like being dragged under, make noise. Someone will come. If your blood feels like fire and light at once, do not shame yourself for putting a leather strip in your mouth. You will need your jaw whole in the morning." The corners of her eyes warmed. It wasn't softness. It was the relief of a sentence that had the right edges. "Understood. Steward will set someone on the other side of your door again. Probably Sable. Maybe the healer if she isn't making rounds. Derek will walk the wall." "I don't want an audience." "You won't have one, you will have a witness." The distinction landed, she nodded. The Lawboard's smallest mark held its quiet like a secret that trusted them to do their part. Sable approached within earshot and stopped. "Riders out past the East Bend," he offered, casual as idle weather. "They count trees with their eyes." "Thornfang." "Most likely." "Keep them outside their patience. A cook can be convinced to make stew near the ford." "He already has," the cook said from nowhere, appearing with a spoon as if summoned by logic instead of sound. Then he nodded at Saras. "Hands?" "Steady." "Good. I've got roots that need a mind not in a hurry." He moved off without waiting for permission to have spoken. Ronan let a thin smile almost live and denied it. He turned back to Saras. "You will come if the tide rises." "I will." He should have left it there. Instead, he heard himself ask a question he did not plan. "Are you afraid of me?" "Yes," she answered, and there was no victory for either of them in it. "And not. You are danger. You are also the wall." "Be afraid of my mistakes," he said, "not of me." "I don't know how to separate those yet." "I'll make it plain." He looked away toward the ridge because if he kept looking at her, the wolf he kept controlled would forget which name he answered to. He nodded to Sable and to Derek, and stepped back into the work of the day like a man resuming a fight with a familiar opponent. Sarah stood a moment longer near the marks cut into stone. She looked at the smallest one until it stopped demanding to be solved and settled into being a truth that didn't require understanding to be obeyed. Her wolf breathed beside her with a steady interest. He will not break us if we do not let him, it said. Can we keep that promise and keep him? Not today. The healer brushed past on her way to the tower stair, a full basket in crook of arm. Eat salt and meat, she reminded without stopping. Drink water. Sleep if it lets you. If it doesn't, we will make it. Thank you. The healer's hand lifted in the gesture of a woman who knows gratitude belongs to the living, not to her. Back in the kitchen, the cook set a new sack of roots on the block and squared it with his palm. Cut even, he said. Mind on the blade. Always. The eager boy set a clean bowl at the edge of the table with the pride of a man who had done one small thing right in a day with too many wrong-shaped questions. The shaved veteran stepped into the doorway, considered the room, and let his mouth admit a thought. Rings clear until the next rain, he announced to the air, which is how men confess that peace holds for a minute and might hold for two. Tell the ring, thank you, the cook said and returned to his pot. The steward passed and set down a new slate mark without comment, the practical blessing of a man who keeps a house running no matter what storms decide to try. Sable leaned against the jamb and stared at nothing as only a man can who sees too much. Derek's boots ticked along the outer walk, even and patient. Saras set the knife to work. The ribbon of power under her skin took the cadence and quieted. When the blade hit a hard knot and nicked, she adjusted. When the sun moved and the light on the block changed, she shifted her stance. She felt the bond on her wrist like a bruise that refused to bloom and decided to keep it that way for now. Near mid-afternoon, a hawk circled above the ridge, a distant cutout against pale sky. It seemed unimportant until the raven on the parapet launched itself into the air with a disgruntled shake and dropped with its graceless bounce. A guard climbed to untie the leather from its leg and vanished toward the tower. The cook sighed like a man who knows supper will not be simple. Sable slid his eyes to Saras. He'll want you out of the hall when the words arrive. I'll be in the kitchen. Good. She kept cutting. The pieces fell into their bowl like small decisions made right. The hum under her skin stayed behind her ribs, contained by work and water, and a promise she had made to herself before anyone else ever offered her one. Outside, the yard altered its posture the way a body does when it knows a hand is about to knock. Inside, the stew came to a quiet simmer that sounded, for a breath, like a welcome that could last. The raven thumped down on the parapet and scraped its beak along the stone as if bored with its own message. A guard climbed, fingers quick on the tie. A thin leather roll came free and vanished into the tower. A small tremor went through the yard that had nothing to do with wind. Men felt it the way old houses feel a storm change its mind. Sable's eyes went to the tower door and back to Saras. Kitchen. I'm here. Stay here. The cook turned the ladle once and balanced it on the pot's rim. Stew doesn't watch itself. I won't let it burn. The steward crossed the lower hall with the roll pinched between two fingers and a slate under his arm. He passed the leather to Ronan in the same motion with which he might hand a tool that fits one task in one hand only. Ronan uncurled the strip with plain care. The words stood crisp and satisfied, dressed in peace phrases that had seen too many mouths to be trusted. They named a parley at the East Ford. They called him brother in the way men do before they reach for your throat. Near the end, a line slid its blade under the skin. I hear you keep a silver-blooded stray. I will teach you her price. The wolf inside him rose and set its forepaws against his ribs. Ours, it breathed, low and final. Law, he answered, and the word struck iron inside his chest. He touched the roll to a candle and held it until the letters browned and curled. Ash fell into a shallow dish, smoke braided thin and clean. The steward lifted his slate a fraction, ready to catch orders. Double posts at the East Ford and the high road rotate by the hour. Old eyes on the ridge, young legs on the stairs. No one speaks to a thornfang mouth but me. Derek's chin dipped. The cook is already walking a pot to the ford. Good, let them smell patience. Sable leaned his shoulder on the door as if a long story had started, and he refused to miss the beginning. And the parley. No. The single syllable fit the room exactly. It left no corners for guesses. In the kitchen, Saras felt the message arrive the way a body feels a shadow pass across water. The hum under her skin woke and pressed once against her ribs, not asking to be let out, asking to be counted. The cook's jaw set a notch. The stew turned slow. The healer appeared with a bundle of cloth, set it on the table, and tied the knot so it could be carried on a run. Salt and water. Keep the leather near. Sleep if it lets you. Wake if it doesn't. The shaved veteran filled the doorway for a breath and left without speaking, which meant his measure of peace had slipped below a mark he trusted. The eager young wolf fetched kindling with both hands and tried not to look like he was running. Ronan crossed to the kitchen and stopped a pace inside. The smell of broth and smoke steadied him better than wind on the wall. Saras stirred, tasted, salted, tasted again. "Raven," she said to the pot. "Raven." "Parley." "No." She nodded and kept the ladle moving. The steam blurred her face and unblurred it. His wolf pressed its head to bone. "Mine?" It insisted. Not a demand. A fact. "Law," he returned and left with the decision intact. Afternoon wore thin and took warmth with it. The ring pulsed with bodies moving in sets. The armory breathed more often. The steward's slate collected chalk like tally scars. Lysa worked the whetstone with more duty than complaint. She avoided the kitchen door and did not spit when Saras passed, which was a small shift in a day that had room for very few. On the wall above the east ford, Derek watched two riders stand their horses where a man can shout and not be heard if the wind dislikes him. The river wore a thin skin that glittered without strength. The cook's pot hung just far enough from the line to infuriate. Steam lifted and drew patience the riders pretended not to see. Sable stood far to the left where he could watch without being counted and ticked minutes with an old habit. Ronan climbed to the tower and set his forearms on stone. The wolf in him hung between restraint and a vow men build their lives around. He watched the riders talk with their hands and pretend they hadn't. Shadows shifted on the far bank. He tasted the wind and found no truth in it. Elder Marwin's riddle slid sideways through his mind, ash-bright and unwelcome. Stormvale winds. When he was young, he had called refusal strength. Now refusal looked like a law he tested each day and would need most when the hour turned narrow. At first dark, the raven came again, impatient with its own duty. The guard untied, descended, and carried the roll like insult and ritual both. The second message did not pretend as much. It named the silver wolf as fact and rumor as proof. It named dawn, not as a request, as a demand. It named price. It insulted him twice and flattered him once. Ronan burned it before he reached the last line. The smoke made the same thin curl. Ash found the dish. The steward set it on a shelf men would remember. Saras heard the murmur pass down the hall and turn corners. Vera, dawn, silver, price. She did not step out to listen. The keep shares its air even when it withholds its secrets. She stirred. The pot answered with a quiet lift and fall. Her wolf pricked its ears. Hunt. I know. Soon. I know. Sable came to the kitchen door with the look of a man who has caught a falling plate and set it down without anyone noticing. You're inside after dusk. Lamp on the latch. I was planning to be. Good. The healer left a second bundle beside the first. For fever, for pain, for sleep that won't come. I might need none of it. You might. People fix roofs before storms whether the leak is real or not. When lamps opened, the house narrowed to islands of light and dark water between. Saras carried bread to the lower hall. Voices fell low, not by order but agreement. The river hardened in strips and broke again where the current insisted. Derek walked the south line and made his small sign, because the pattern steadied minds as well as doors. Sable moved through shadows that took him as if they had been waiting. Ronan stood under the arch with the lawboards. He held his palm near the smallest mark without touching, and let the weight of that old cut remind him what a boundary is for. Leave room, but not for men who take what isn't offered. The wolf inside him returned a vow as simple as bone. Ours or none. If I choose wrong, he answered inwardly, I unmake what I built. Choose right. He went to the wall. The East Riders were still there, colder and worse at hiding it. The cook had edged the pot an inch farther away, not as insult, as discipline. Back in the little room off the guest corridor, Saras set a cup and the leather strip on the table the way a soldier lays tools before a job. The cloak held the day's heat. Folding it slowed her pulse. Footsteps came long before they reached the door. Sable's knock tapped twice. All right. Yes. Lamp. On. He moved on. Derek's heavier loop went past and returned. The healer's even tread paused, then kept. The house held her, not as a prisoner, as a thing placed where hands could reach if needed. Sleep came like a waypoint on a known road. The forest rose around her with its clean, cutting cold. The river split under a skin of ice and kept moving because that is what rivers do. The silver wolf stood where it always had and watched as it always did. Tonight there were other shapes between the trees, long shadows with spears, breath in quick, eager puffs, men who enjoyed the work of pursuit too much. The wolf did not bare teeth. It turned its head and checked the line of the ridge like a man checking his roof. It opened its mouth and let a word out that struck the air and made it ring. The hunt begins. The sentence landed on her sternum like shape, not heat. She looked at the hunters and read the arrogance in their knees and the emptiness in their eyes. She set her palm to the wolf's neck, where letters moved like water writing. Cold ran up her arm and centered behind her breastbone. The fear organized itself into something she could hold. She woke with her hand on the cloak and the lamp laying a small coin of light on the latch. The room was as it had been. The door was as it had been. Her breath was not. It had chosen a steadier measure. Awake, her wolf said, not command, naming, I am. It listened with her. Footsteps, wind, the low murmur of men on a wall who kept their voices under the stone's liking. Sable, moving past. Derek somewhere counting, not numbers, possibilities. Ronan stood over the fort and let cold fill the empty places in his anger until it was useful. The riders shifted and stood again in stubbornness, because that is what men do when they want to look like law and don't know how to make any. He could taste Vera's grin in their posture. He could taste ash from burned words. The wolf inside him did not soften. Ours, or none. You want the second more than the first, he said inwardly, and the thought surprised him with its almost truth. You'd rather refuse the road than watch it be taken. Not ruin, the beast answered, refuse. He held the idea until it stopped looking like pride and started looking like a line he would not allow crossed. He looked toward the guest corridor without moving his head. He could feel where she was the way a man can feel a new tooth under the gum. Choose with me, he told the dark, or I will choose to keep you away from every hand but mine. The wind gave him no answer. Wind announces and moves on. A fox barked once downriver and made the riders startle like boys. Saras set the cup down and kept her hand on the cloak, not because it was his, because it was weight that made choices feel real. She thought of the hall, the lamp on the latch, the Lawboard's smallest mark. She thought of the healer's blunt bundles and the cook's order to mind the blade. She thought of the way Ronan had said no to Vera twice, and had not let the room see his want. She thought of the faint ring at her wrist that wasn't a chain unless she let it be. I will not be anyone's pawn, she told the quiet. Not the man who thinks my name is coin. Not the man who wants law to be a hand on my neck. Her wolf set its head against the inside of her ribs and breathed with her until the room matched it. We choose. We do. You are afraid? Yes. You walk anyway. Yes. The door took a breath as night cooled and wood settled. Sable's knock touched it twice, soft enough not to wake a bad sleeper, exact enough for a woman listening. She lifted her hand and let her knuckles answer. Above, Ronan closed his fist on air he could not punish and opened it. He made the shape of a vow without speaking because some words thin if you spend them where ears can reach. He would not hand her to another mouth. He would not rush her into a collar and call it law. He would not let Vera carve her story out of other women's bones. He would keep the door, keep the wall, keep the watch, and when the road demanded, he would put his weight where the ice would hold longest, because that is what a man does when a house sits on his back and a storm wants the roof. At the ford, the riders turned their horses at last and made the slow, resentful walk away that men make when patience has taught them nothing. Derek lifted a hand. The guard took down the pot with ceremony and none. Sable watched shadows thin on the far bank and smiled once to himself without joy. The steward set the dish of ash on a high shelf. Proof has its uses. Seris lay back and let her eyes stay open until the room softened. The cloak was heavy and clean. The leather strip waited where she had left it. Her breath moved without asking permission. She found the line she meant to carry. I will choose my fate. Not his. Not yours. Mine. The wolf agreed without pushing. We will be more than their stories. We will. She shut her eyes with the plain certainty of a woman who has counted the doors and decided which stay open. The lamp on the latch burned small and steady. The keep held its breath the way a house does when it knows dawn will bring questions and has already decided to answer them standing up. The moon climbed clean and bright. A white coin pried up out of the ridge. Its light ran across the keep until the courtyards looked scrubbed and bare. Men worked as if the air had a timer in it. Posts doubled. Ropes coiled tight. Buckles checked twice, and then checked again by hands that pretended not to be nervous. The river tried for a skin of ice, and failed, glittering where the current refused. Saras felt the pull long before the light reached her window slit. The silver along her forearms had stopped pretending to hide. It lived faint and real beneath the skin, as if moonlight had found a way to settle there. She tied her hair back, pulled on her boots, and opened the door. Sable stood opposite, arms folded, the lamp breathing over the latch like a small animal. His eyes asked the question. He did not speak. All right. I'm not staying in. Not my call. The corridor carried the murmur of a house holding its breath. The steward slid past with his slate under one arm, chalk in his fingers, counting posts in a low voice that sounded like a practical spell. He tapped a mark for the east ridge, another for the ford. He paused near Saras without giving the pause away, then moved on. The lower hall smelled of iron, smoke, and a thin broth the cook had set to keep hands steady. The shaved veteran stood at the ring door and watched for flaws in the line of men moving through forms. The eager young wolf held a coil of line like a prize, and took it from one hook to another, as if the carrying mattered more than where it ended. Lysa oiled leather with the rough care of someone who trusts tools more than people. Ronan was a dark shape at the arch where the Lawboards hung. He didn't move, but the room corrected its posture around him. When Saras crossed under the arch, his attention met her like a wall. Inside. No. Tonight isn't for courage in the open yard. Tonight isn't for cages. Sable's mouth almost curved and then remembered itself. Derek stepped out of the shadow by the stairs, posture the shape of patience trained to hold under weather. The wolf inside Saras lifted, certain as tide. It is time, let me breathe. Her body hummed, not loud, unignorable. The silver near her skin rose a degree. Breath stayed even because she told it to. Ronan shifted a half step closer, not enough to loom, enough to change the weight of the air. Cold iron and cedar edged his scent and rounded the edges of fear without erasing them. You will not lose yourself in the yard for men who like stories. I will not lose myself. You will carry what's in you where stone and air can hold it. Stone and air are everywhere, she said. Your men are too. His gaze held hers a long breath. The wolf in him pressed to the bars of his ribs an old demand with a deeper edge. Claim her, keep her before any other mouth names her. Law, he answered inwardly. Wait. The steward returned with a second slate and the look of a man ready to write what he already knew. Ronan did not look away from Seris when he gave the orders. Derek, East Ridge doubled, lanterns hooded. No mouths to Thornfang. Sable, keep the inner yard narrow. If a crowd forms, thin it with work. The instructions moved outward like a muscle flex. Lysa strapped a bracer and stood. The shaved veteran drifted closer to the mouth of the ring. The eager boy found a reason to be at the water butt, then the tool rack, then the door. Seris lifted her chin and the moon turned her eyes to metal. I will not be hidden. You will not be alone, Ronan said, and the truth in it slowed the heat under her skin by a hair. If you fall where hands can reach. Then step away from the door. He didn't, but the shape of the refusal softened. The beast inside him set its muzzle on bone and watched. A short shout climbed the wall. Derek listened with his whole body. A guard on the east parapet made the small sign that meant riders, count 2, holding off the line. Sable tipped his face toward the wind. Ridge. Let them count trees, Ronan replied. No one speaks. Night deepened until lamps seemed smaller without dimming. The river's noise sharpened, a thin thread under everything else. Seris felt the moon inside her bones now, as if every long part had been tuned to it. Her palms prickled. Silver drew nearer. Her wolf's voice steadied. Let me breathe. She set her feet to the stone. Standing is a decision. Not here, she told the voice. Not yet. She turned toward the court because motion might soothe. Sable paced with her to the arch. Outside, the sky felt nearer, as if it had come down to live between the walls, and the walls were only suggestions. Men worked, ropes pulled, buckles checked. The shaved veteran moved through a precise form that calmed the young wolves near him without admitting it. Lysa took a post by the armory with a blade at her hip and a stare that kept jokes away. The eager boy edged along the ring, then forced himself across the open, jaw set in an imitation of bravery that might one day become the thing itself. Seris reached the center without meaning to. The ring remembered every man who had bled there and gave her the quiet that comes from use. The moon pushed free of a thin cloud, cold and unblinking. Her body seized, and it wasn't pain first. It was recognition, the sudden click of something long misaligned sliding into place with too much force. Then pain, bright and exact, burning along her spine like a mark pressed into wood. Her knees cut out. The ground rose. Air left in a clean sweep, then roared back too fast. Now, her wolf said with no question left. Heat raked her bones and turned to something else as it moved. Fingers cramped, stretched, cramped again. Long muscles found new lengths and hated them, then loved them. Skin became too small, then exactly right, then something the word skin could not hold. She would have panicked, but she had already decided not to. She rode the pain the way you ride a wave you cannot stop, back rounded, teeth tight against her own tongue. Breath dragged when it wanted to run. She did not scream. The change took her like honest weather. Impersonal, thorough. Shoulders split wider, hands shortened and hardened. Ribs took a new rhythm. Her jaw remade itself with the deliberate violence of a craftsman who knows where to strike. Light pulled back, sound sharpened until she could hear rope fibers rasp wood, a guard's tooth click, and the small question the wind asked the ridge. Then it was done. Where a girl had crouched, a wolf stood. Silver lived in her coat not as decoration but as truth. Across her shoulders, fine lines cut like runes caught in motion, shifting when she breathed, arranging themselves in patterns no hand had learned to write. Her eyes were molten, not any metalmen named, something older. She set her paws, and the ring felt the weight of her. Breath in the yard broke and remade itself. Lisa's mouth opened and closed before a word could decide what it was. The shaved veteran's chin lowered a fraction. A soldier's answer to a banner he hadn't known he followed. The eager boy forgot his coil and held air instead. The healer let out a quiet breath she had held all day. The steward's slate dipped and rose as if to mark this and failed to find a symbol. Sable smiled with his eyes and put the smile away. A murmur moved like wind through grass. Cursed. Goddess. Stormborn. Ronan stepped forward and the sound died. His hands were empty. He wanted nothing in them. The wolf in him pressed hard against bone. Hunger edged with awe. Claim her, it urged, mark bind. Law, he answered, and law was not aboard tonight. Law was the thin line between what he wanted and what he must be. Saris's wolf turned its head. His scent hit like winter over Riverstone. Iron, cedar, a clean smoke. Under it the heat she had refused to name. She moved toward him because bodies do that when they recognize home and refuse to admit it. He lifted a hand, slow, palm open. His breath kept its calm. The men around them learned whether this night gave them a Luna or a story built to make them run. The moon burned. The silver in her answered. Power rose off her like fog off a lake at dawn. Stones along the ring cracked with clean fluting sounds. Dust lifted in a circle and fell. The nearest warriors stumbled as if the ground had lowered an inch without telling them. Lysa's fingers twitched toward her hilt and stopped. Habit overruled fear. The eager boy made a sound and swallowed it whole. Sable leaned toward the danger by the width of a breath and decided not to move. Derek shifted his stance and shifted it back the exact same distance. The healer lowered the leather strip with a small nod. Ronan did not back up. He took one small step in. Moonlight sketched his cheekbones and made his eyes darker instead of bright. The beast inside him pounded like a drum. Now, it demanded. Take what is ours before another writes their mouth on it. Choice, he said, and the word tasted like iron and patience. Saras circled him because circles teach hunger and restraint in the same lesson. Her paws placed themselves where men train for years to place their feet. Her breath read his pulse. A sound rose in her chest that might have been a growl or a prayer. Power wanted to be spent. The woman refused to spend it like coin. She stopped in front of him and pressed the world down to two bodies and the moon. He watched her with the steady attention of a man who has learned to put out fires with his bare hands and keep his palms. Take me, he said, voice low and meant for her whether she heard as woman or wolf. Or walk free. The ring heard. Its silence changed shape. Shock rippled through it like heat through glass. Lysa's scorn made room for thought. The shaved veteran's jaw tightened and then eased. The eager boy forgot to breathe for a heartbeat. His wolf roared at the posture. Kneel and we are meat. Kneel and we become what we tell them to call us, he answered inwardly. And he went down to one knee on cold ground. The sound that moved through the pack had nothing to do with fear. Respect knocked against old habit and found purchase. No alpha made himself smaller in a ring on a night like this. No alpha asked when he could take. Saras lowered her head. The scent of his skin was heat and vow. The marks on her shoulders shifted, found a new pattern, and held. Her wolf spoke with a voice that was not pleading and not command. Mate. The woman stood next to that word and looked at it from every side the way she had learned to look at knives. Not a chain. A line you choose to hold and be held by. She stepped the last inch and touched her muzzle to the center of his chest where bone keeps the heart from careless hands. Light answered. It did not explode. It arrived, a rising breath that made breath impossible for anyone else. Silver ran outward along the ground as if learning the cracks for later. Men dropped to their knees because their bodies knew how to survive what their minds had not yet named. Dust hung like fine silk. The lawboards under the arch caught a pale flare and held it. Ronan tipped his head back a fraction, eyes closed, as the bond slid into him, with the inevitability of dawn. His wolf stopped using words and lay down with its eyes alive. He let the light do its work and did not try to shape it. He allowed himself one clean thought. Ours, and hers, or nothing. The light receded the way tides do when they have taught the shore something new. Sound returned in pieces. The healer breathed out. The steward lowered his slate as if it had grown heavier. Lisa found a different word than the one she'd been about to use and kept it. The shaved veteran set a hand on the ring post and found it warm. The eager boy laughed once, short and unbelieving, then clapped his palm over his mouth and looked startled by himself. Sarah stood without shaking. Power slid back under her skin like a creature that knew its den. She turned to show the ring her eyes. Wolves look away from things that own them. The ring did not look away. It bowed, a ripple traveling through muscle and pride. She shifted. It hurt less, not because the body had grown used to it, because the mind knew where to let go. Bone remade itself with care instead of hurry. Skin found itself. Breath slid sideways and forward. She was human and she was not. Both true. Ronan's cloak was already in his hand. He set it across her shoulders without ceremony, not to make her small, to keep the cold from telling its own story about this night. "You will not be caged," he said, so the ring could hear and hold him to it, "and you will not stand alone." "Good," she answered, feeling the line between them stretch and hold. "Because I am not small." A murmur moved, not mockery, recognition. The cook, somehow near the edge of the ring with a ladle like a banner, lifted it once and looked annoyed with himself. The healer folded the leather strip as neatly as a seam and tucked it away. The steward made the smallest mark, that means noted. Sable leaned into the arch and hid his smile. Derek listened to the ridge and found the quiet there useful. On the far bank, two silhouettes turned their horses in the moonlight and rode a little way, then stopped, then rode again. They had learned nothing, except that they would not teach tonight's lesson. The moon held the ring in a cold palm. Saras pulled the cloak close and kept her chin high. The silver under her skin dimmed to something that might pass for quiet, if you didn't know where to look. The bond at her wrist pulsed once, and behaved. Ronan looked over the pack and was answered by a wall of eyes. He did not need to shout. Posts hold until dawn, mouths closed, eyes open. This house stands because we do the next thing right. Bodies moved because that instruction sits well inside muscle memory. The ring emptied like a tide drawing back to show what it had rearranged. Lysa passed within arm's reach and did not reach for words. She nodded once and went to her post. The shaved veteran took up his spear with purpose instead of relief. The eager boy ran, tripped, recovered, and ran again, a grin he could not fight pulling at his mouth. Sable drifted to Saras's side and made it look like the most natural thing in the world, that a shadow wanted to stand where light had just been. All right. Eat," the cook called, rough like he was angry at hunger for daring to exist tonight. "If the world ends in your stomach, I'll take it personal." The small laugh that answered was enough. The healer touched Saras's sleeve with 2 fingers, a check and a blessing, then moved on to count bandages she might not need. Derek's boots ticked the walk in an even line. The steward hung a fresh list where eyes could find it without asking. Ronan did not reach for Saras again. He didn't have to. The air between them had changed and would not be fooled by distance. He looked once toward the ridge where the riders pretended to be patient and found he could endure the hours between this and dawn. His wolf finally settled into its place with a contentment that made his bones ache in a better way. "Ours," it murmured. "And hers." "Both," he agreed. The moon went on with its business. The keep breathed. The river argued with its thin skin and learned nothing. Saras stood wrapped in black wool with silver under her skin answering to itself, and for the first time since a plank floor in a torchlit hall had tried to name her, she felt the word legacy settle on her shoulders with a weight she wanted. She glanced toward the lawboards. The smallest mark near the bronze edge held its cold without needing anyone's hand. Leave room for what the ridge brings you. The ridge had brought a moon and a bond and a choice not stolen. That was enough for this part of the night. The ring did not forget. Heat still clung to the posts where hands had held. and the hush had a weight of its own. Saras stood with Ronan's cloak around her shoulders and felt the bond settle in her bones like a new kind of balance. The silver under her skin had learned to dim on command, yet it answered the moon in a fine thread she could not cut and no longer wished to. Sable lingered near the arch, a shape the dark preferred. Derek crossed to the east steps with an unhurried measure that made younger wolves match him without thinking. The steward returned to his slate and did not write yet, as if marking this would make it smaller. The cook went back to his pot with a growl for anyone foolish enough to skip supper, which meant no one would. The healer folded her bundles and checked her own hands, a woman counting tools by touch. The shaved veteran drew stragglers into order with a glance. The eager young wolf carried wood he didn't strictly need, chest lifted like a drum. Lisa stood at the armory door with a whetstone locked in her fist, studying Saras as if she were a beam that looked too thin and the math had to be redone. Ronan's attention moved across the yard like the edge of a blade laid against cloth. He did not touch Saras. He did not need to. The space between them had learned a new law and obeyed it. His wolf lay down in him without sleeping, ears pricked, and ours, it said, no longer pressing, merely guarding. Both, he answered, and his lungs loosened around the word. A small dry sound cracked from the ridge and died. Derek paused with one boot in the air, set it down slowly, and looked up. The guard on the parapet tapped the rail, the sign that meant riders, count two, keeping their distance. Sable's head cocked like a fox catching the last note of a tune carried on wind. Still counting trees, Sable murmured. Let them learn how long it takes us to stand. Ronan replied. Saras took a breath that felt fully hers. The yard's tension carried an aftertaste of awe. Beneath it lay the ordinary beat of a house returning to itself. Her wolf moved within that beat, like a creature finally allowed to turn around in its den. More, it murmured. Let me run the circle. Not yet, she thought back. Learn the yard first with 2 feet. The eager boy appeared at her elbow with a cup he had clearly stolen from the kitchen and offered it with both hands. For you? She drank. Water steadied things she had not noticed were still moving. Thank you. He nodded, dazzled by being answered, and ran. He did not spill. The bond pulsed once along the inside of her wrist and settled. The silver along her forearms kept quiet, ready to serve if called. Her wolf watched the ring with satisfaction, edged by hunger. Let me show them, not the breaking, the holding. Ronan had already turned toward her, as if hearing a question before it was asked. Let me try, she said. In the ring. With you near. He weighed the cost. The pack had eaten awe and fear and respect in one swallow. Wonder twice could intoxicate men and make them clumsy. But luck is a story told after law and practice. He nodded once. Circle only. No one crowds the line. Sable drifted forward to shape space without touching it. The shaved veteran posted himself where a falter could be caught before it became a fall. Derek set a hand on the nearest post and split his gaze between ridge and ring. The steward chose a place not at the front and not at the back and fixed his eyes on the ground. Some loyalties hold better when made in private. Saras stepped into the ring again. The ground kept what had happened and welcomed more. She let the cloak fall to her elbows, not for proof, for weight. Breath in. She counted heartbeats to mark them for later. She lifted her palm and stopped when the hum under her skin woke. Thin wire pulled taut between 2 sure points. Hold, her wolf said, pleased to be consulted. She let the pressure climb and then flattened it with a thought and the memory of onion skins and a steady knife. The hum softened. No stone cracked. Dust did not lift. The ring stayed ring. Again, Ronan said softly. She raised both hands a fraction. The silver answered like a trained muscle. It crested, and she set it down. A flicker skimmed the ground and died a foot from her boots, as if the earth refused to be used without consent. She released breath slowly. The world did not punish her for taking her time. The eager boy made the shape of a cheer and forced it back in, turning it into an awkward cough. The cook glared from the doorway and tilted his spoon in warning. The boy fled to useful errands. An edge hit the air like iron striking stone on the ridge. Every man stilled in the manner of wolves who have decided quiet is a weapon. The guard signaled again. 2 figures, pulled back, watching. Ronan let his jaw loosen. He would not let men outside his wall write the inside of this night. Finish, he told Seris even. She closed her eyes for one breath, opened them on purpose and bent her knees. The shift licked along her bones, and she refused it. Another pull tried to lengthen her breath, and she held it steady. Faint runes under the skin of her forearms pulsed once and stilled as if nodding. Enough, she whispered inside, and her wolf agreed, content. She gathered the cloak, felt the cloth's weight with gratitude out of proportion to wool. The yard's temperature returned to normal. The ring remembered and kept. Ronan inclined his head to her, then to the circle, telling the pack what to do without insulting them with the instruction. Those nearest bowed. Those farther away did something like it. Lysa tried the shape and found it fit better than expected. The shaved veteran's mouth tugged toward a smile and stopped. The healer watched Seris's hands and checked them off a private list. The steward lifted his slate, thought better of it, and lowered it again. Back to posts, Ronan said. The yard obeyed because there was work and work calms hands. He and Saras crossed under the arch together and parted one step beyond, practiced ease already waiting for them. He turned to the lawboards as if to consult an old friend. She paused at the beam where the steward hung lists and read the new marks, as if numbers were stories worth learning by heart. Sable slid into the corridor and let the dark have him in, the way that does not deny help. Derek took the inner steps with a cadence easy to find if you knew how to listen. The healer climbed to the tower to press blankets into unwilling hands. The cook built a second fire and muttered to it like a father on the edge of worry. Saras paused at the doorway of the small room she had been given on her first night. The lamp threw its coin of light on the latch again, steady and ordinary. Ordinary had always been something other people got to keep. She stepped inside, set the cloak on the cot, then turned back, unwilling to be lone in a moment that belonged to a house. Lysa had followed to the threshold, whetstone tucked away, blade wrapped. She looked at the lamp, then at Saras, then at the empty hall behind. You bend it, Lysa said, and I hold it. I am learning. Good. I'm tired of ghosts. Lysa took a bench near the door, shoulders set like a woman who will not be pushed off her ground by a knight that thinks it's clever. The eager boy appeared with a stack of bowls and hovered until the cook jerked 2 fingers. He carried them as if they were a banner. The shaved veteran accepted his share with a grunt that meant thanks. The healer pressed 2 fingers to the soft skin at Saras's wrist, not for speed, for steadiness, and gave a small, satisfied sound. A bony flutter broke the rhythm. The raven thumped down on the parapet after an irritated circle. A guard climbed with quick fingers and brought the thin leather roll to the steward, who passed it to Ronan without putting his fear or anger on it. Ronan uncurled the strip without haste. Polite words with blade edges, dawn, ridge, silver, named like praise and meant like price. He touched it to the lamp. Letters browned, curled, and fell into ash. He passed the dish to the steward. Let him keep teaching himself patience. Saras watched ash fall and felt nothing in her that wanted to answer with heat. The bond hummed once and settled. Her wolf's ears pricked, then eased. Loud, it said, small yet. Loud, she agreed. Ronan crossed the hall and stopped just inside the small room. All right, sleep if it finds you. Wake if it doesn't. I will. He held her gaze a heartbeat longer than words required. Not for reassurance, to teach his body that distance is not withdrawal. He stepped back and let the door be a door. Sable tapped the wood in their rhythm. She answered with hers and heard his weight lean into the wall like a man content with a position he had earned. Farther along, the eager boy whispered about the light until the guard told him to keep his mouth, without cruelty. The shaved veteran corrected a strap. The cook stirred with the energy of a man who believes a hot pot can keep roofs on. The steward added one small line to his slate in a place only he would understand later. Seris set the cloak aside again, returned to the corridor, and walked with purpose toward the yard. She did not want the night to end with hiding. The pack did not need a spectacle. It needed the ordinary courage of a Luna who could stand in a doorway and ask a simple thing. "Bread," she said to the cook. He slid a half loaf across without comment, then added a wedge of cheese with a grunt that might have been tenderness if he allowed such words. "Thank you." She carried both to the ring and set them on the lip of the nearest post. Not like an offering, like a pause in work. Lisa came and broke off a piece. Derek took a crust with his left hand while his right kept counting the ridge. The shaved veteran tore a bite and returned to his watch. The eager boy circled twice, then darted in, grabbed a heel, and fled laughing under his breath. The healer declined with a nod and went back to her rounds. The steward arrived last and took the smallest piece, as if the act of sharing were the mark that mattered. Ronan watched the circle form and dissolve with a satisfaction too quiet to be called pride. His wolf's tail thumped once against bone. "House," it said, pleased. "House," he agreed. A wind slid down the ridge and found every corner of the keep. It carried cold, the smell of distant pines, and the brittle patience of men on the wrong side of a wall. Posts held. Ropes kept their good shape. The lawboards did not need touching to remember their meaning. The bond between Alpha and Luna held like a line tied correctly and tested under load. Saras felt the moon's pull ease a degree as clouds wandered across its edge. Her wolf settled deeper, pressing its back against her ribs. "We stood," it said. "We did not break for them. We will not." She returned the cloak to her shoulders and walked the line with Derek for a dozen paces, listening to the ridge through the soles of her feet. She paused at Sable's shadow and let quiet be enough. She stood under the arch where the smallest mark lived and looked without touching. Leave room, she thought, and the night felt larger, not more dangerous. The cook's voice found its way across the stones like a rope tossed sure-handed. Bowl for anyone who plans to stand when dawn minds its manners. Wolves drifted toward heat in simple arcs. Seris took her place among them, neither at the front nor the back, and ate what the house offered. Her body accepted the ordinary gift and filed it under strength. The silver under her skin lay calm. The bond thrummed once more, not a demand, a reminder. Ronan lifted his bowl to no one in particular and everyone. Posts hold, eyes open, mouths shut. A low assent moved through the room, more spine than sound. Outside, the river scratched at its thin shell and tried again. On the far bank, two riders shifted and pretended not to. The lamps breathed. The keep breathed back. And Saras, who had once been sold, stood in the ordinary circle of a house at work and felt the night tilt toward them, not away. Dawn opened under the ridge in a pale seam that made the lamps look greedy for light. Frost dusted the ring posts and the lip of the well. Breath showed, and then faded. A spoon clicked against a pot somewhere in the lower hall, and kept better time than any bell. Saras woke before the stripe of sun reached her door. Sleep had come in clean slices and left a quiet she could keep. The cloak still held her warmth. When she stood, the silver under her skin answered with a small pulse and settled as if it also understood the hour. Her wolf rose with her and stretched in the long space behind her ribs. "We are whole." "We are?" Sable leaned against the corridor wall, familiar as the stone. He tapped the door once with two knuckles and let his weight return. All right. All right." The hall smelled of smoke, damp wool, and a hunger that waited politely, because the house was making enough to share. The steward passed with his slate under one arm and a chalk smear along his knuckle, lines written and erased into a sum he trusted. Derek's stride looped by, even and unhurried, the set of his jaw a finger's width easier than in the night. The healer came down the stairs with folded blankets and the look of a woman who had prepared for worse and was content to be unnecessary. In the yard, the shaved veteran tightened a strap one last time and then put his hands behind his back like a man allowing himself a small rest. The eager young wolf stood near the ring with a coil of rope held lower today, not as a shield, as a tool. Lisa had a blade wrapped in cloth and an expression that had stopped looking for a fight and started looking for the day's work. The cook set a big pot in the threshold. Meat and barley and onions turned the air kind and practical. He handed a bowl to a guard coming off the wall, another to the next, paused, and lifted his chin at Saras. "For you." She took the first bowl. Heat went into her fingers and down through her ribs like a promise. Eyes marked the order and did not resent it. The healer gave her a nod so small it might have been a breath. The steward lowered his slate by a notch. A clever man's way to acknowledge without trying to own the meaning. The eager boy stared at the steam as if it carried instructions. Ronan crossed from the lawboards with a pace that had nothing to prove. He didn't touch Saras. He didn't need to. The space between them had shed its old names. His wolf lifted its head, watchful and satisfied. "Ours," it murmured, more oath than hunger. "Both," he answered, and the word fit cleanly. The pack gathered without being called. Wolves stepped from posts in a slow sweep, forming a crescent that left the ring open. The shaved veteran took a place near the front but not the center, the way a soldier gives a leader space. Lisa stood 2 steps back and left, flanked by younger wolves who pretended not to be watching her. Sable stayed where a shadow carries words quickly. Derek held the edge and faced outward because facing outward is a habit that has saved his life. The steward hung his slate on a nail and brought nothing between himself and the moment. The cook wiped the ladle with a cloth and glared at anyone who looked like they might make a speech out of breakfast. The healer stood, open-eyed, in the cold. The eager boy hovered until the shaved veteran crooked a finger and set him in line. Ronan looked over them and did not raise his voice. Snow traced the ridge in a fine line. The river breathed out a stitch of mist. "This is Seris Valewyn. She is Shadow Fang. She is mine. And she is more than mine. She is law." The words settled as if the stone accepted a new carving. Some wolves bowed because their bodies knew before their minds decided. Others bowed because a weight that will not move deserves recognition. Lisa's chin dipped and rose, testing the shape and finding it fit. The shaved veteran gave one slow nod that said he would gamble his scars on it. The eager boy bowed too low, caught himself, and came up red and grinning. The healer shut her eyes for a heartbeat in a private blessing. The steward's mouth softened at the corners. Sable took the easier side of ready. Derek inclined his head the smallest amount and kept the ridge in his periphery. Warmth that wasn't skin ran along the line of the bond and returned with the house's shape. Saras felt it settle where breath lives. Her wolf lifted its head and drank. House, pack, mate, us. A dark flutter broke the clean edge of morning. The raven came low and ill-tempered, thumped onto the parapet, stabbed the stone with its beak. A guard climbed the ladder, untied the thin leather strip without fumbling and meant to hand it to the steward, and the steward meant to pass it to Ronan, and habit carried it across the yard without feeling owned by it. Ronan didn't unfurl the roll like a performance. He looked at Saras once, not warning, not asking, sharing the fact that men send words when bodies have already decided. He opened the strip. The letters were neat and pleased with themselves. They named the ridge, dawn, silver, and price. They asked with the tone of men who assume the answer is theirs. He touched the edge to a torch and held the leather until the last letter turned into smoke. Ash fell into the small dish the steward kept for this, and settled like a practice the house refused to unlearn. "Let him come," Ronan said to air and ridge and the part of himself that hates waste. "He will find us standing." The sentence moved through the pack like heat, not fire. It made no one shout. It made them breathe together. The shaved veteran's hand rested on his spear with respect for wood. Lisa's shoulders lowered, a weight placed where it belongs. The eager boy's back straightened without stiffening. The cook shifted the pot forward a finger's width and set out a second ladle, because feeding courage is part of making it. The healer tucked a lock of hair behind her ear and smiled, quick and fierce. The steward left his slate where it hung. Derek measured the ridge and filed positions for later. "Standing," Saris's wolf said. "We prefer that." She finished the bowl and set it on the step. The quiet wasn't absence. It was readiness. When she looked up, the new line of sun caught the silver in her eyes and made a crown where no hand had placed one. She didn't move toward Ronan. She didn't need to. He stepped nearer by the distance of a palm, and the air made room for them. The house resumed its ordinary bravery. Posts rotated, gates checked, ropes rewound. The shaved veteran adjusted two raw-boned boys with the pressure of a hand and the patience of a wheelwright. Lysa inspected a quiver, hissed at two heads, and made the armory honest. The eager boy ran messages in a loop so clear a blind man could have traced it, and still he felt important because the loop existed and he could carry it. The cook ladled and swore affectionately at anyone who argued measures. The healer set bandages where her hands could find them without eyes. The steward began a new column that looked inevitable. Sable made sure no corner filled with trouble. Derek walked the long line and faced outward. Saris went to the arch where the Lawboards lived and stood under them. The smallest mark at the edge had not warmed. It didn't need to. In her chest, something not pride and not relief drew in a breath and kept it, like a man hearing a note his ear had waited for without knowing. Leave room, she thought, but not for men who take what isn't offered. Her wolf approved. We keep doors, we choose who uses them. The work found its rhythm. When the first press of duty eased, she went to the quiet behind the hall and sat where sun could touch her hands and not her eyes. Sleep came with the clean drop of people who have earned it. The forest rose around her as easily as breath. Air cut, and then became the only air worth wanting. The river wore a skin where it could, and honesty where it couldn't. The silver wolf stood in the clearing. Exactly itself, no hunters in the trees, no men at the edge to make a lesson picturesque. The wolf watched her, then lowered its head until its muzzle nearly brushed the snow. A bow, not to a master, to an equal who had arrived. Light walked the markings over its shoulders, then drifted apart into the air, not leaving, joining what was already there. The wolf did not go. It became the place, and the place held the shape because it always had. We are Storm, her own wolf whispered, satisfied. We are free. She woke with her hand on the cloak. A square of sun had moved across the floor. The lamp no longer burned. Somewhere in the lower hall someone laughed, and the stone took the sound and made it small and good. A gate sighed and closed like a thing settling into the right fit. Ronan waited at the base of the tower with a patience sharpened and softened in equal measure. He had walked the parapet once, spoken to 2 guards, listened to 3, and refused to stare at the ridge longer than the ridge deserved. His wolf sat with lively stillness. Battlements, Sable said, stepping from shadow already knowing. Battlements. Saris joined them at the stair and climbed at a pace that did not hide how her body liked the work. Wind met them at the top, clean and colder than below. The ridge showed its winter bones. The river ran and refused to lower its voice. The sky was washed and sure of itself. They stood where the wall asks for decisions and found none were needed. Derek paced below, small and exact. A living measure. The steward's path cut neat lines through the yard. Even the way he turned his shoulder had the economy of a man offended by clutter. The cook carried a pot to the brazier near the east watch because hot food at the far edge is a promise men respect. The healer bound a guard's knuckle and made him laugh. The shaved veteran leaned into a post and owned a square yard of ground with quiet confidence. The eager boy trotted, miscounted, corrected, and tried again, grinning when he thought no one saw. Lisa had 3 new wolves checking arrows for splinters and sent 2 back to do it again when they rushed. House, Ronan said, not to anyone, to the air. The word felt like a structure that had chosen him back. Seris set her hands on cold stone and let dawn lay a silver sheen along her fingers. The light woke the metal under her skin and left it calm. Her wolf pressed its muzzle into the palm of her thought and listened. He reached for her hand without claim. She took it because the space between them had become a place to stand together. Wind lifted the edge of her cloak and let it fall. "Whatever Vera sends," Ronan said, almost too soft to hear, "he will not find you alone. I will never be a coin to pay his stories. You will be law he cannot afford." Below, the steward rang a small bell to mark the hour, not to summon. Posts changed hands like tools passed along a bench and improved by wear. Frost melted from the ring posts and left the wood darker and truer. The raven hopped twice along the parapet and launched itself, then thought better of usefulness and kept its distance. Saras breathed and felt the word legacy settle where breath lives without weight. She wasn't a secret to hide, or an omen to fear. She was a blade honed for the work asked of her. She could feel the thin line of law under her feet, and the wide room the old mark had promised. "Leave room," she said, and the wind carried the words out and brought them back. Ronan's fingers tightened for one heartbeat, not warning, agreement. His wolf moved closer to the bars and watched the day like a creature finally fed and allowed to keep what it hunted. The eager boy looked up and elbowed the shaved veteran. The veteran didn't look. He didn't need to. He allowed himself a small smile at nothing. Lisa glanced up and caught herself standing easier than she had in months. The cook lifted his spoon in a guilty salute and scowled to cover it. The healer squinted at the light and nodded, as if the sun had met her standards. Derek kept his attention outward and felt where the keep had placed its center. Saras faced the coming day. The ridge sat where it always had. The road would bring what roads bring. The river would keep arguing with ice. She held Ronan's hand, the stone, and the breath that chose her. The line she had carried since a torchlit hall tried to sell her did not break. It brightened. She was no longer the souled Omega. She was the legacy reborn,